across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Just gone 1 o'clock. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm kind of identifying as Ian Collins, I suppose. Ian's off. I am in the hot seat, as I was yesterday, for one more day only, just till 4 o'clock today. And then I will be handing over to Peter Caldwell. Yes, as you've heard probably throughout the day, lots going on in the world of migration and two-tier justice again. Two things that I'm aware, really get your goat. So we're going to be digging into the latest developments, first of all, with regard to migration, and not just the numbers, but the revelations in the Sun today. Our colleagues over at the Sun, or rather underneath us actually, they're on floor 10 below us here at Talk Towers, where we're on floor 17. They have effectively undertaken an expose and spoken to some of the migrants that come over on boats to find out exactly why it is they come over. And this probably won't be much of a surprise to you, but frankly it's because, guess what, we're a soft touch. We are of limitless generosity, one put it, and the fact that you can come over on a boat, have your hand out, and we fill it generously with all sorts of things. Now I know we know this, but the fact now that we have this very loud and clear and kind of cemented, demonstrated very clearly by those that are coming over that are actually not deciding, not bothering to end up in other countries, but just here. We are a destination because we are a soft touch. We roll over and we have our belly rubbed by migrants from all over the world. But what makes it worse, and this is what the Sun have really dug into, is that it appears that if you actually are a migrant on a boat and you encounter the French authorities, to put it mildly, they encourage you simply to stay in your boat, paddle a little bit further, get into UK territory, get into UK waters, and then as a consequence of that, they say, look, don't worry, in about an hour, you will be picked up by the British Navy or indeed the RNLI. The RNLI that of course used to be a great charity until they became a taxi service for migrants from Calais to Dover. So as I've just said to Alex, obviously tongue-in-cheek, isn't it about time we really took France to task on the basis that they are absolutely taking the mickey out of us? This is the country that we've given £500 million to try and stop the boats. And forget smashing the gangs for a second, that pointless, fruitless load of old nonsense from Keir Starmer. We've got allies here in many respects, people that across the channel that we're supposed to be friends with, that we've given good money to and had no doubt lots and lots of conversations with to stop migrants. And they're effectively putting these migrants in boats, pushing them into the channel and encouraging and enabling them. It is absolutely outrageous. What an ungrateful nation France is where it comes to our relationship with them over migrants, don't you think? 0344 499 1000. Do you agree with me that France have a case to answer here? Surely we should be standing up and not just trying to smash gangs, not just removing incentives, not just rallying against diluted sentencing guidelines, which I'll come to in a second, but actually saying to France, look, we're supposed to be partners here. You said you would help and assist. We've given you money to do so. We have a contract. We have an agreement, and they are literally sticking two fingers up at us and not just allowing it, seemingly encouraging it. I guess if you were the French authorities, the French police, you wouldn't want the migrants there, you'd want them here, wouldn't you? So therein lies the problem. So we will be talking about that lots more, particularly in a second, actually, with my first guest, Kevin Schofield, who I'll come to in a second. But the other big thing that we're going to be talking about today, as I know you probably heard on Alex's show and Mike's show today, is this issue over two-tier sentencing. The Sentencing Council, who we will be talking about in some detail also throughout the next 3 hours, who have decided not only to come up with this madness around the belief, their guidance, their recommendations, that if you are a transgressor of immigration law. So in other words, if you break the law by way of immigration, instead of getting up to 10 years for being in this country illegally, breaking into this country, invading this country, let's tell it how it is, instead of that being the penalty, particularly if you use fraudulent documents, instead they say that the sentence, the penalty, the disincentive should be watered down, diluted to a mere 9 months. And we talked about this on the show a little bit yesterday, that there's no coincidence at all that if a sentence is received by someone of less than 12 months, it means they then can't automatically be deported as a consequence of that offence. So today, the Sentencing Council, the unelected, undemocratic, unaccountable council of 15 members, have decided to reject the Justice Secretary's pleas to change their guidance. So, yes, something else that I'm sure will get your heckles up. Let me know what you think about that. Or maybe we should be soft on migrants. Maybe, as some on the left believe, we need loads more migration because it's good for the country, it's good for the economy, it's great for our culture. Let me know what you think about that. 0344 499 1000, or indeed you can text 87222, just put the word talk before your message. You can leave a voice note if you don't want to speak to me. I won't be too offended. Call the same number via WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000. Right, let's kick this off with our first guest, Kevin Schofield, who is political editor of the Huffington Post. Kevin, you just heard my rant there. What's your reaction, first of all, to the French? I might be perhaps a bit tongue-in-cheek here with regard to suggesting that we go to war with them, but we've helped them quite a lot over the years, and this is how they repay us.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You mentioned, Russell, the £500 million that, and that was under Rishi Sunak's government. I think that this agreement was put in place. I remember Rishi Sunak announcing it with great fanfare that France was going to assist the UK in stopping the boats. Well, all the evidence would suggest that's not the case, and if anything, it's gone the other way, that they're just sort of standing aside, really, and not keeping up their end of the bargain. Now, what's interesting, obviously, is that we are currently in talks with the French about Ukraine. Keir Starmer is in Paris today, actually, speaking to Emmanuel Macron about Ukraine, and you would think that, given the opportunity, you might want to have a little word with him about what France is doing in return for all that money that British taxpayers have given them to try and deal with this issue. Because, Keir Starmer has a vested interest in this as well. You mentioned it there. He talked about, smashing the gangs, that illegal immigration would come down, that all immigration actually would come down under Labour. So, he has a political interest, a deep political interest in getting to the bottom of this problem as well.
Kevin,
do you on it, then the voters will pass judgment in 4 years' time.
And he is on the hook for this, of course, because he, a bit like the economy and growth, he and his front bench made great stock in the run-up to the election of the fact that he was going to dilute immigration, he was going to bring legal and illegal immigration down, and, of course, smash the gangs. Not one single gang, of course, has been smashed in the first 9 months of his premiership, of his government. So he does have a lot riding on it. So, I mean, is it as simple? I mean, obviously, you're a man that kind of rubs shoulders with politicians left, right and centre. Is it as simple as him saying to his friend, as part of this new special relationship with the French that Keir Starmer seems to want to talk a lot about, as you say, with regard to Ukraine, surely he will have a word with him, won't he, given that he'll be in the same room as him, or is that not how it's done?
Well, you would think so. I mean, the way it's done on these meetings is that the meetings are very tightly controlled. This is what the meeting is about. So on this occasion, it's about Ukraine. Therefore, we won't be able to talk about other stuff. However, we have this phrase, in the margins. There's always meetings in other rooms, if you know what I mean. They'd be talking about the main thing, but there's always opportunities. Yeah, on the fringes, exactly. They'd be able to, you would imagine, given it's such a hot political topic in this country, and as we were just saying there, Keir Starmer has an awful lot riding on it, you would think that he would want to discuss it with them, not least because the French, they want to bring up fisheries as an issue in order for the UK to form some sort of defence pact with the European Union. So, if an issue like fisheries, which is important to the French, is on the table, then you would imagine that the British would be well within their rights to say, right, fair enough, we'll talk about that, but let's talk about immigration as well, because you signed up to a deal with my predecessor, Rishi Sunak, and it doesn't appear on the face of it as if they're keeping up their end of the deal. So surely there's some sort of position, an agreed position that they can get to that's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to see some kind of audit of this. I mean, it is taxpayers' money after all, £500 million that's been sent over to Paris for the specific purposes of helping to prevent those migrants coming from France to here. There should be some kind of paper trail, some sort of marking of the homework, shouldn't there? Seriously, in terms of where that money went. So did it go to increase the size of the gendarmerie? Has it gone to CCTV? I think you probably recall a few weeks ago, we heard a revelation revelation that despite that money, as you say, going to France 2 or 3 years ago, they'd only just turned the CCTV cameras on the beaches a few months ago. So do you think that we are justified in demanding some kind of audit trail so that us poor taxpayers for once can actually see the justification for where that money went?
Well, yeah, you would like to think that when the agreement was made that there would be some sort of key performance indicators, to use the jargon, that would say, well, look, we'll give you this money, but we want to see results in return. And if we don't see progress being made, then we will withhold some of that money. I would assume it wasn't just handed over in one cheque for £500 million. It would have been paid up in instalments. Whether it's all been paid up until now, I don't know. Maybe
well, based on performance, you would hope, wouldn't you?
Well, you would think so. So you see, right, well, you'll get a chunk in advance, and we want to see, evidence that that money has been put towards. I seem to remember that part of it was, as you say, to increase patrols on the beaches, to try and prevent the people leaving France in the first place. So you would want to see evidence that that money is being spent where it's supposed to be spent funny, before you actually send any more.
It's funny, Kevin, isn't it? In the private sector where I work most of the time, it would have been a deal a bit like this. It would have been, look, we're seeing about 50,000 illegal migrants coming over on boats every year. Tell you what, we'll give you £1,000 for every one of those 50,000 that doesn't come over next year. So in other words, for everything below 50,000 migrants, we'll pay you a bonus. Funny how that deal wasn't done based purely on success and performance, isn't it? Rather than just giving the money away.
Yeah, well, that would have made sense, and that would have been a clear incentive for France. If they want the money, then they would need to implement measures in order to achieve that objective. It would appear certainly that wasn't the deal that was done, because, as I saw from your ticker on screen there, it's something like 25,000 already have come across on boats since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. So well on the way to record numbers.
And an increase this year on last year, let's be clear. We can see the rhetoric and the spin and the obfuscation from Yvette Cooper every now and again, where she picks very, very select pieces of data to try and make it look as though actually the migrant crisis is diluting, it's being solved. But the reality is the people that are coming over on small boats illegally, the number so far this year, so in the first 3 months of 2025, is about 10 to 15% higher than it was in the first 3 months of 2024.
Yeah, and that is a big political problem for Keir Starmer, just as it was for the Conservatives when Rishi Sunak talked about stopping the boats. That's a very easy message for people to understand, and they held them to account on that. That's one of the reasons you speak to Conservative MPs, they'll tell you, that is one of the main reasons why voters were so angry with them come the election last year. And the same story will play out, and Keir Starmer knows this, the same story will play out in 4 years' time at the next general election if Labour haven't kept their promises on reducing immigration. So, as we say, Keir Starmer's got an awful lot riding on this, so you would like to think that he would be seized of the importance of it and take it up with Emmanuel Macron at the earliest opportunity.
Well, let's hope that happens today. But yes, it's not been a particularly fast start, has it? Later on, actually, we're going to be talking to Stephen Wolfe, who's Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity on this, and the fact that apparently now you can get VIP treatment on a boat, Kevin. So if you want to pay a little bit extra, a bit like you would do on a Virgin flight to the US, you can upgrade, a bit more leg room, maybe an in-flight boat movie and maybe some bar service. So I'm going to be talking to Stephen Wolfe about that. I mean, I kid you not, that is what is now on offer to migrants. You can literally upgrade your travel. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. Let's turn to sentencing, though, because this is the other thing that's really irritated me this morning. We talked about it on the show yesterday, the Sentencing Council for Great Britain, which is made up of 15 judges, senior police officers and magistrates, have decided to significantly dumb down the recommendations to judges when it comes to sentencing people for immigration crimes. So this is not immigrants that then commit crime, of course, which is significant and a whole different kind of conversation. This is the very issue of immigration and a crime being committed by way of that immigration into the country. In fairness, actually, to Shabama Mahmood, who's the Justice Secretary, she has railed back at the Sentencing Guideline Council, the Sentencing Council, and said, look, and of course she's of an ethnic minority. She said, I don't think actually that ethnic minorities should be treated differently. It should be justice and being fair for all, which would seem to make a lot of sense, wouldn't it, from a common sense perspective. But the Sentencing Council in the last few hours have pushed back and said, no, these are going to be our recommendations. Who the hell are these people, Kevin? The fact that they are unaccountable, unelected, it's completely undemocratic. We've got 15 people effectively deciding now to fire the starting gun, to wave the green flag for even more migrants to come over, because they're not going to be concerned about the penalty for breaking the law on entering Britain.
Well, I mean, as I understand it, so that these sentencing guidelines were reviewed, and I think that review began under the previous government, certainly, because there was a feeling that at the moment there is an imbalance in terms of those being convicted. There's an ethnic imbalance, basically, towards ethnic minority people are more likely to be convicted in court, and the Sentencing Council looked at that to try and find out whether there is some way that can be rebalanced. Now, what a bias?
Sorry, Kevin. Do you mean you think? I mean, I know it's not you saying this. You think that there is an assumed bias that people of an ethnic minority are more likely to be convicted, or do you mean they're more likely to commit a crime?
Well, no, it's just that they're looking at the statistics. They weren't making a comment on whether they were more likely to commit a crime. They were just saying on the basis of the statistics, it seemed as though there was an imbalance. I'm just reading the letter that the Sentencing Council sent to Shabana Mahmood. They say that those handing down sentences must do all that they can to avoid a difference in outcome based on ethnicity, and they were suggesting that at the moment the balance is off, and it basically.
Well, so hang on, and I know this is not you saying this. I'm not having a go at you,
yeah.
but this is to look at the statistics, and I guess they're looking at it as a per capita thing, whereby there is a disproportionate amount of people from ethnic minorities that are convicted. It seems that the message there is that is disproportionate and it's not fair, without actually looking at the fact that it may well be, and we have seen now data on this, thanks to people like Rupert Lowe and others that have looked at the propensity for certain people from certain countries to commit crime, and that from certain countries is higher. It may well just be that there are certain nationalities, not race, but certain nationalities that have got a higher propensity to commit crime, and that might be why there's a disproportionate amount of people convicted and in prison per capita. Has that not struck them as being something that might be quite obvious, do you think?
Well, yeah, perhaps. What the argument that they put forward is that the judges need more information effectively before they pass sentence. So that is why they want to improve the evidence or the information, the background information about convicted criminals.
Sounds like two-tier justice to me, Kevin, doesn't it you, honestly?
Well, so that is what Shabana Mahmood is concerned about. Now, again, politically, they can absolutely see why Robert Jenrick is making an awful lot of hay with this. You see he puts up lots of videos on...
Well, he's the Shadow Justice Secretary, in fairness, but so he should. I mean, the Conservatives and Reform should be.
I'm not criticising him for that. It is absolutely a completely justifiable policy and decision for him to take in order to do that, because this is a definite weak spot as far as Labour are concerned. Now, what is interesting about this is it's a question of whether or not the Sentencing Council should or should not be independent, and not just them, but other organisations. If they are independent of government, they're enough.
Surely, Kevin, it's a government decision. It should be a government decision. We've got to go to a break, but let's come back and carry on with this. And also want to talk to you about W.H. Smith, the kind of disappearance of W.H. Smith off the high street, and also shoplifters that can steal £19,000 worth of stuff and get off. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Back after this.
Buckingham Palace obviously play this down because they don't want everybody, jumping up and saying, what's happening to the king. But I think it does happen. We don't know what kind of cancer he has because he's been very careful not to say, so he's not associated with just one type of cancer. But obviously he's in the position that the tiniest thing that they might be worried about, they're going to pop him into hospital.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. 24 minutes past 1. It's Russell Quirk. I'm in for Ian Collins. Big question of the day, based on what I've just been talking to, and we'll continue to talk to Kevin about Kevin Schofield, political editor of the Huffington Post. Are France to blame for our migrant crisis? I mean, they seem to be pretty enthusiastic about effectively picking them up, putting them on boats and helping them across the channel, saying, look, don't worry, if you're in the middle of the channel, you won't have to wait very long. There'll be an RNLI lifeboat or someone or other will pick you up and take you to a nice warm hotel room on the banks of the South England coast. So are the French to blame? Are they ungrateful? I think they are. 0344 499 1000. Give me a call or text. We've had loads of texts already, by the way. Thank you very much. You can text 87222 plus the word talk, obviously, then your message, whether it's about France being to blame for the migrant crisis, which I think partly they are, or indeed sentencing guidelines I've just been talking to Kevin about. But in that vein, Kevin, who still joins me, by the way, Kevin, hopefully you're still there.
Yep.
Did you see this story about the shoplifter that has been imprisoned previously for shoplifting, got caught wandering around Oxford Street, pinching stuff from very upmarket shops? And I should make this very clear. This is not a shoplifter that's shoplifting because they need to eat. They're not nicking chicken soup, bread and margarine, but stealing high-end shoes, handbags and electronic goods to the tune of £19,000, goes to court, not for the first time, I'm sure not for the last time, and the judge lets them off a prison sentence because, wait for it, they've got mental health issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's the type of thing, isn't it, that people reading it, they'll be tearing their hair out, really. They just don't understand some of these sentences that are being passed down in the courts. I mean, obviously, it's an important principle in this country that the judges are independent of politicians. I think that's incredibly important. However, I think there should be maybe an explanation of some kind as to why someone who has, as you say, stolen thousands and thousands of pounds of high-end goods should receive a lenient sentence. Now, if they are in some way vulnerable in prison, if something harm would befall them, then clearly that has to be taken into consideration. But I just think on the face of it, a lot of people will read that and just think that doesn't make any sense at all. Well,
the problem is it's not just about whether they've got mental health issues or not. And to me, it's not an excuse. If you steal, I don't think there's a mental health condition that makes you steal. I don't think so. But of course, it's the way that the system is gamed. And whether it's, a migrant that should be deported that claims, I don't know, Christianity or homosexuality or whatever, on the basis that that's why they can't now be deported back to a Sharia country, or whether it's someone that has been nicked for shoplifting many, many, many times. And bearing in mind, when they've actually been arrested, that's probably their 100th offence, their 200th offence. Let's be honest, we know that most shoplifting offences do not get brought to account. The fact you can just play the mental health card, I mean, it literally is a get-out-of-jail-free card, isn't it? Just to say, I've got anxiety, I've got a bit of ADHD. What's the other thing that's now very popular, which is nonsense? The oppositional defiance disorder. ODD is apparently a thing. So if you're used to kind of talking back at people, you won't take instruction, you hate authority, and you're a bit of a naughty kid, there's now a label for it, ODD. So I guess on that basis, if you've got a bit of ODD, you go out shoplifting and get off. That's the problem with this approach, this lenient, woke approach from our judiciary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very extreme. I mean, you would imagine there'd need to be, proper medical evidence to back up this claim, of mental health problems. It's not as if they could just stand up and just claim it without any evidence to back up. They need to be adoptable, had to have diagnosed it. However, you just touched on the problem there as well. There's a huge shoplifting problem in this country. You see it when you go into a shop these days, a supermarket. There's always security guys on the door, and they don't really have any power to stop them. They're just there as a bit of a deterrent, and it doesn't usually work.
Not much.
Now, the whole point as well of publicising sentences handed down, part of it is to act as a deterrent to the wider public. If you see someone goes to court and they get a really heavy sentence for a crime, you're probably going to think twice about committing that crime yourself.
I might give it a bit of a go. Next time Waitrose or Ocado turn up on my doorstep, I'm just going to take the stuff and just close the door. Trouble is, I think I've already paid for it, haven't I? So yeah, no. So right-minded, honest people like me, we can't get away with it. Not that we ever would. Talking of shops, WH Smith been on our high streets for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's an institution, and I know we bandy around such words pretty liberally, but WH Smith has been sold 480 of their stores for £76 million, which actually doesn't strike me as a lot of money for such an established business with so many stores. So sold to a company for £76 million. They're going to close all the high street stores, and those that they keep, which will be at airports and train stations, they are rebadging. So what do you think about that in the first place? The fact that we're losing yet another institution, another Woolworths, isn't it? If you can remember that far back, or another Blockbuster. It's almost another Blockbuster moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just think it's really sad, isn't it, when you see these brands that you've grown up with, you've known them all your life. I think it's over 230 years WH Smith has been trading in the country, and it's just another huge blow to the high street. Everyone has shopped in WH Smith's at one time or another. It's probably more likely to have been at an airport or a train station in recent years, but they're always a staple of the high street, and unfortunately it's just the way things are going now. Where I live in London, there's a department store which has been on the go for, I think, just about the same length of time as WH Smith. They're closing a big store near where I live. It's just people shop online now.
Sad. It's really, and they do. So, and it's going to be rebranded, by the way, to TG Jones. So from WH Smith to TG Jones. That wasn't very creative, wasn't it? Do you think that's not very imaginative, is it? To go from Smith to Jones. Wow. Well, look what they did there. Is it testimony, do you think, to... Yes, it's a changing world. I get that. It's what I call the Amazonification of everything. The way we buy our kind of toner cartridges and our SD cards and, our books and our, fridges and whatever has all changed via the internet. But don't these businesses, WH Smiths, no matter how established they are, have an obligation really, particularly to their staff? And obviously we don't know what the effect is here in terms of job losses, which obviously should be the big part of the story. But don't they have an obligation to innovate and to keep up?
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, when you go into the shops have changed an awful lot over the years. But, sadly, as a former newspaper man myself, the bread and butter was always selling newspapers. That would draw people in. Unfortunately, people aren't buying newspapers in anything like the same numbers that they used to. So, the footfall into these shops won't be anything like what it used to be. Now, clearly, WH Smith's is known for selling stationery, for books, all sorts of other things as well. But, if the country and most people now, as you say, shop online, if you're going to do that from the comfort of your living room rather than nip down to WH Smith to buy a book, then inevitably this is going to be the end result, unfortunately.
Yeah, I do also want to know, and I don't think it's in the press release, what happens about the WH Smith stores that are due to close that have post offices in them. You'll remember years ago there was a huge outcry because post offices were closing but being embedded within WH Smith stores. If those WH Smith stores are now closing, what are people going to do, particularly the elderly that want to and need to go to post offices? Talking of the elderly, let's just quickly, before you go, let's talk about King Charles, of course, has been readmitted to hospital over the last 24 hours. We're told it's standard, it's usual, but it's as a consequence of a reaction to his cancer treatment. What do you make of that? Anything more serious you think that we should be reading into this, or should we not overreact?
No, I don't. I mean, on the face of it, and obviously the Palace are very careful about what they release, it would appear to be relatively minor. You obviously got to remember he went through a terrible 12 months of cancer treatment, so it's maybe not unusual that he has maybe a little bit of a setback, not least because he works so hard. In the last year, he's done something like over 400 public engagements. That's over one a day. He was supposed to be doing 4 in Birmingham alone today, that had to be cancelled. So that gives you an idea of how hard he works. So maybe he's been pushing himself just a little bit too far. He is a 76-year-old man as well.
And he does work hard. He does work hard.
And he does work hard, and it's not, and he has undergone grueling cancer treatment, so it's maybe not that unexpected. So maybe this might be a little warning, you know, maybe to take it a little bit easier. I don't think anyone would begrudge him putting his feet up for a couple of weeks until he is he's fighting fit again. But yeah, it looks as though on the face of it anyway,
well,
it's been a bump in the road. I think it's
doctor's orders, I guess. It's got to be pretty difficult being the monarch's doctor, hasn't it? You know, telling your patient, who happens to be the head of state, what they must or must not do. But yeah, good luck with that. Look, Kevin, thank you very much indeed. Very informative as ever. Thanks for the last half an hour. We will see you again soon, no doubt. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Stephen Wolfe, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. Hold on to that word, economic prosperity, 2 words. And we're going to be talking about my accusation that the French are enabling illegal migration. Shame on the French, don't you agree? 0344 499 1000. Let me know what you think. Russell Quirk, this is Talk. Back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Yes, it's me, Russell Quirk, identifying as Ian Collins until 4 o'clock, then handing over to Peter Cardwell. Lots coming up. Obviously, we've talked already a lot about this two-tier justice, this two-tier sentencing, which is going to be a real thing. And it seems that the Sentencing Council, those 15 unelected judges, magistrates and senior police officers, are determined that effectively when it comes to migrants, so people from other countries, that when they break into this country and they break migration law, that they should in effect be let off the hook, and certainly by their contention not given a sentence that allows that individual, having broken the law, to be later deported. Well, I want to talk to Stephen Wolfe now, so Director for the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. Stephen, welcome.
Good afternoon, Russell.
Good afternoon. Can I just read you some of the text that we've got already? I mean, we're only 37 minutes into the show. We've had, I mean, loads and loads and loads. Let me just read you some, just to set the scene. Not to influence you, Stephen, because I know you definitely have a view on this, but this is what people listening and watching this show think. The Sentencing Council need to earn the right to be independent from the voting public, and they are proving that they despise what the majority of us think. The Sentencing Council should be disbanded, says Stewart. Sentencing guidelines, says Wayne Linnett, Robert Jenrick gave them a way to sort this out. He gave them an amendment to current legislation that could be implemented immediately, but Mahmood, who is the Justice Secretary, of course, said no, we aren't going to do that. So I believe they don't want it to be changed, i.e. the Labour government, and their verbal opposition is exactly that, just verbal. Debbie Dobson says judges don't need the background of the criminal, they need just evidence. The person's background shouldn't be a factor. I couldn't agree more, Debbie. And Lorraine says, finally, we should not be surprised at the deliberate, concerted efforts of the Sentencing Council to create a two-tier justice system that favours minorities and illegal migrants over the indigenous population of Great Britain. Labour's Shabana Mahmood has made a lot of noise but has taken absolutely no proper action against this perverse quango. She has the power to disband it and to stop this madness, but she has chosen not to do so. Therefore, I have to conclude that this is exactly what Labour wants, and Mahmood has been playing a smoke and mirrors game and fully intends for two-tier justice to prevail. All our democratic values are being eroded by this government. It is sinister and it is dangerous, says Lorraine. Your thoughts, Stephen?
Well, I'm a barrister. I have spent time in the criminal justice system, and I have both prosecuted and defended. And I will say that the Sentencing Council guidelines, as I knew them when I was practicing, were a very useful vehicle and a very useful tool at that time to help those involved in the criminal justice system understand the kind of range of sentences that are available for the judge to be able to sentence an individual, and thus give us as guides, both as prosecutor and defend counsel, to be able to advise our clients. What I fully understand is where they have enhanced this particular sentencing council now to look further beyond just normal aspects of your background, you know, whether you'd had previous criminal intentions, whether you'd been impacted by violence at home, for example, that might have been relevant to a case where a woman had been attacked by a previous boyfriend and committed assault. All of those were relevant, and I think most people found those particularly insightful and helpful. Where it's clear is that you have both sides of the political divide, Conservatives and Labour, saying that this is effectively a two-tier system. And I've seen arguments for those saying, well, we should leave the independence of the Sentencing Council alone. I do believe in the independence, and I do believe that they should be left alone. But where there is a groundswell of opinion that perhaps they have overstepped the mark, then I think either they should listen or the government steps in.
Well, I think
and this is where you enter the world of politics.
Yeah, no, democratically, certainly, it should be of the will of the people. I mean, you know, it is these people, you know, whether it's the law, judges, lawmakers, and so on, that surely should be at the behest of the people they serve. OK, well, let's switch over to this whole French issue. And obviously, I've been a little tongue-in-cheek this morning talking about the fact that actually, when it comes to law breaking, the French should be taken to task. The French are responsible, I think, for almost enabling and empowering, I guess, migrants to our shores by way of boats and illegal migration. They have a case to answer, don't they, the French? Particularly if we've got a contract with them to help prevent migration to this country illegally, because there is, what's the law of contract as a barrister? Offer, acceptance, consideration. Well, we've offered them to do something, they've accepted, and there's a consideration of £500 million of our taxpayers' money, Stephen. Why aren't they doing the job that they contracted to do?
Well, they're not doing the job that they're contracted to do, and it's just more than that money that you've mentioned there. It's actually about £2 billion that they've been handed in various forms of grants since 2014. 2014 was the first time I went to one of the camps in a wet, cold December when they were building what was the new Sangat, and within 6 months that was filled. And ever since then, they've taken more money from us and never really delivered. And this is not surprising. They are very clued up in how to evade their own laws and evade the kind of international issues that would impact them by not doing the job with Britain, because they know, just like the people smugglers know, that Britain is too frightened of actually engaging with international law. Russell, we're very clear, and the government has known it through the Home Office Select Affairs Committee, that there is the law of the sea, that we have the opportunity to return boats back to France, that our border forces could do the same and force France to do this. But we don't. And that's down to the issue of the Foreign Office and also the Treasury. The Foreign Office, because they're too frightened of involving themselves with an international incident with our French friends, as they call it, and the Treasury because they don't want to impact any agreements that we have with France over trade. And that's why we won't do it. The people
Stephen,
smugglers therefore benefit from it.
It's a completely and utterly one-way street. So we don't want to upset the French, so we throw money at them because we think that's a way of placating the problem. But they don't seem to have any issue actually enabling people into boats and, you know, almost pushing them into the water and then saying to them, it is alleged by the Sun expose on this today, that they are told, look, as you get into kind of, you know, the waters between France and Britain, and as you drift towards Britain, you will be picked up in less than an hour, don't you worry. So that doesn't seem that they're being particularly obstructive and preventative in terms of stopping those people leaving the shores of Calais, does it? So why are we so scared of what the French think, for goodness sake? They don't seem to care at all what we think of them enabling 40,000 migrants to come across the Channel every year.
And you're right. Why don't we do it? I mean, this is a big question that we've asked.
We've got no backbone. It's just backbone, isn't it?
It's absolutely right. I mean, I've written to the Home Office, I've written to governments in the past, asking them why they don't carry on with the opportunities that they have through international law to return boats. And you never get a response, not properly anyway. And it comes down to backbone. There comes down to a real fear in government. But I also think there is something more deliberate now, and that comes out with the issues that we've seen with Boris Johnson, and recently we've had various former conservative ministers saying that we need mass immigration to fill our construction jobs because of low birth rates. This again is the issue of the Treasury. So I think there is a deliberate intention from government not to upset our European friends because they also believe it will help economically through GDP. And that is wrong.
But
we
Stephen,
now know that living standards are falling.
They still think that. I mean, I'm not an economist or a politician, but even I know that if you allow tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in by way of net migration, whether they're legal or illegal, particularly illegal, if they don't contribute to the economy, either in terms of qualification, job role, wealth, or as employers, then they become a detractor. They become a taker from the economy. So how can we have, you know, the likes of Philip Hammond and others, you know, supposedly clever people that have been around the block politically, that presumably most of them have been to Oxford and Cambridge, as I understand it. How do they not understand that actually bringing in people that don't contribute doesn't therefore grow GDP per capita? How on earth do they not understand that? And how on earth do they get elected in the first place?
Well, they get elected because they know how to work the system and get the, as some would say, Liberal Democrats or CNOs in the Conservative Party, or those people who don't really believe in a great deal as long as it means that they're elected. This is where the political issues are going on. But why they don't turn tail is because it's institutionalized. They've been institutionalized at university from professors and lecturers who believe in this Keynesian idea of GDP rather than GNP per capita. They've never been really challenged by either those economists at the Bank of England or in the Treasury to actually review what's happening. So they always listen to past data. And now it's really, really hard for them to actually accept that they failed. How many people do you know really can turn around and say they're sorry when the economic facts are facing them clear in the face? And that's where I think they are. They're doubling down on their mistakes. They're doubling down on their economic errors. And they're doubling down on the fact that they're making Britain poorer by ideas that no longer fit our economy for the future.
But Stephen, I think what I'm hearing you saying is this isn't just failure of policy. This isn't just failure of execution. This is not just, for instance, the civil service pushing back against the elected will of politicians. You're saying that this is ideological. You're saying that whether it be a left-leaning Conservative administration, as we've really had since Theresa May, arguably David Cameron as well, and certainly now under Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper, you're saying that this is purposeful. So we rail on this station, and I'm sure on maybe one or two other channels, but not many, about the problem of uncontrolled and, you know, open-door immigration, let's call it. We ask ourselves and politicians all of the time why they can't fix this problem. And we kind of ruminate as to, you know, is it that we can't get border force to do their job properly? You know, will the Navy simply decide that they're not going to put boats in the Channel? Is it a question of processing? Is it the ECHR? It's none of those things. What you're suggesting, and I think you're right, is that successive politicians, successive governments over the last 20 years, really, they want what is happening in terms of migration, this influx of all and sundry. They want it to happen, and that's why it does continue to happen.
Well, I'd come to the conclusion that that is indeed the case. I mean, I was looking at the Migration Observatory from Oxford University, did a research recently on the attitudes to immigration in the UK. Most people, like myself, believe that it's good to have some immigration, but the vast majority now, for nearly 20 years, have said that huge open-door migration has a negative effect on the economy.
And we haven't even got to, sorry, we have to call it short, unfortunately, but we haven't even got to culture, society and crime yet. We've only focused on the economy. Look, Stephen Wolfe, as ever, thank you very much indeed. Wise words. Until next time, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, calls and texts, and there have been quite a lot of them. I'm Russell Quirk, this is Talk. We'll be back in a couple of minutes' time.
Britain has got a very major growth problem. The headline numbers actually exaggerate what the real position is. Why do I say that? I say that because actually what matters isn't the headline number, is growth per head of population, the per capita.
And the population
growth
is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger by the year.
It is.
And not from birth, from boats and from visas.
Absolutely correct. So if you look at the last 5 years, per capita growth, per head growth has not increased at all.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's Russell Quirk in for Ian Collins. We're just talking to Stephen Wolfe there. At the beginning of the conversation, we touched on the whole two-tier sentencing thing. We will be talking to David Spencer at about 2:30, who's the head of crime and justice at Policy Exchange, be talking to him about that. Lots more coming up, but in the meantime, some calls. But let's talk to let's grab some texts first, because as I said just now, there have been lots and lots of them. So thank you for these. Patricia Wilson says, Russell, I'd like to see a migration refugee detention facility built in Calais, yeah, right on the beach, I think. So as the boats dock, straight in, process them, turn them round, straight back again. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Janice from Staffordshire says, why are you and everybody else so surprised at France's duplicity? Their attitude to Britain hasn't changed in centuries. Well, yes, indeed. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I think they should be a little bit more grateful, all that we've done for them over the years, you know, world wars and all that. Zach says, we can set up a European coalition to send our army to protect the borders of a country 2,000 miles away within a few hours, but we can't protect our own borders from millions of unknown individuals entering our country illegally. Presumably, the illegal immigrant crisis is a coalition of the totally unwilling. Yes, I like what you did there. Finally, Peter says, the gang we need to smash is the EU, specifically the French, because they are the ones allowing the poor persecuted asylum seekers, I think that should have big inverted commas around it, shouldn't it, Peter, to cross the channel. That's Pete in Lincolnshire. Yes, indeed. Right, let's speak to Scott now, who I think also wants to talk about French migration. Scott, are the French to blame? Should we blame them for, or at least partly blame them for our illegal immigration problem?
We can quite easily blame them for quite a lot of the stuff that's going on, but they are not the only ones to blame. The strongest point of problems, the ECHR demands that someone can't be sent back for chicken nuggets reasons and every other superfluous.
Yeah, but that's after they get here. Scott, we're talking about before they get here.
Before they get here, the French, they've got the problem of the people on their coast. Easiest solutions to them, ship them across the channel, make them our problem. And that's the answer to their problem. But that means that they become our problem.
Yeah.
If we want to truly stop this, we've got to actually stop the boats, yes, in the water, but it's not the waters of the English Channel, it's in the Mediterranean. It's the influx of migrants into Europe itself.
So from Syria to Turkey, Turkey to Greece to Italy or so on. So you're suggesting that we stop the influx of the millions of migrants that end up across the whole of Europe. And of course, you know, there are other countries that have an even bigger problem than us and have done historically, the likes of, Germany very, very famously. So you're suggesting we stop even more boats, but across a bigger expanse of water. I'm intrigued, Scott, as to how you think we stop more boats, loads more migrants on a much, much bigger expanse of water. How do we do that?
That would have to be done across the European continent, not just the
What, via the EU? Okay, but now assuming that the EU aren't going to do that because they're useless,
okay.
What do we really do?
We had the coalition of the incompetent, best way of defining them.
Yeah. That is the EU.
They would actually say that we could go around the world and save everyone else's borders, but we can't save our own. If we were to use that and say, right, we will protect the borders of Europe, the southern borders of Europe, then you could actually reduce a lot of the problems throughout every country of Europe.
Scott, you mean the land borders? I mean, that's tens of thousands of miles. You mean what, from Cyprus all the way over to Portugal?
Well, if we're going to basically stop the problem, you have to stop the problem at its source. And the problem at its source is not the English coast. Yeah,
but I think, Scott, where I disagree, I mean, look, obviously if you stop the source, I mean, I thought when I saw the little narrative on the switchboard here which says that, you want to suggest that we stop this at source, I thought you were going to talk about how we need to do lots and lots of things for the people of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on. But we've tried that. We've tried invading them. That didn't work out very well in the end. We lost loads and loads and loads of lives, and I don't think it achieved anything at all apart from creating the likes of ISIS, frankly. So I thought you were going to say that, and you haven't. But why are we making this? Why are you suggesting we make this an even bigger problem? We can't solve the small problem, let alone a problem of people coming across a bigger piece of sea in even greater number. I'm not sure that you're being practical, Scott.
If we stopped the problem in the channel, if we were somehow to make a barrier and stop all the boats from coming across, one, it doesn't stop the ones coming in over the air because we have so many licenses by the government handed out like confetti to all people who want to come to this country for an education.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, let's go back in history. We've talked about the French not being very grateful despite what we've done for them. You know, we stopped the Nazis invading this country. We've only been invaded, I think, once. I mean, maybe twice, the Vikings, maybe 1,000 years ago. We're pretty good at defending our borders up until 20 years ago. Now we're not. You know, we used to have such a navy that we went out and single-handedly abolished slavery across the world by way of the British Royal navy. Now we can't stop 40,000 people coming in across a 2-mile stretch of the beach at Dunkirk and Calais. Look, Scott, we've got to move on because I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of calls. I do appreciate your call, though. Thank you very much. Don't quite agree with your solution. Let's speak to Simon in Basingstoke on the same subject. Simon, what's the solution, my friend?
Well, I think we should try and adopt some of the approaches that Donald Trump has found so successful. I would suggest we explain to the French that unless they not just stop the people crossing the channel, but take back everyone who's come from France, that we'll put a 25% tariff on all French imports, and that will go up 10% a month for however long we negotiate, that we will revoke the visas of the 94,000 French citizens working in the UK, and that if after 6 months we don't reach an agreement where they will take these people back, that we will basically ban French fishing boats from accessing British waters permanently.
So the tariff thing is an interesting solution. Obviously, it's something that Donald Trump certainly seems to like a lot. The trouble is with tariffs, they backfire a little bit, don't they? Because, of course, there are such things as reciprocal tariffs. So if we applied a 25% tariff to cheese and champagne, one would imagine that they would do exactly the same thing on Fortnum and Mason hampers and Range Rovers.
Yeah, but the difference is that there's a trade imbalance, and there has been, not just with France, but with the whole EU, ever since we joined it. So we have the French export 15 billion plus more to us than we export to them. So if there is a
so it will hit them harder, you mean? It will hit them harder.
Yeah, it will hit them harder. But also, let's consider what the impact of this is. You know, we're spending $5 billion a year at the moment, and that's just to house these people. That's excluding all the other costs. You can probably double or triple that.
Yeah.
And that is literally 5 times what they're aiming to save by cutting the winter fuel allowance.
So, well, look, Simon, we've got to move on. I've got to go to the news. But look, not a bad solution. I think we just take the incentives away and make sure that the penalties for coming here illegally are much, much, much stronger. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Keep the calls and the texts coming. This is Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I'll be back after the news.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's me, Russell Quirk, with you until 4 o'clock, and then handing over to Peter Cardwell for another 3 hours. Then Kevin O'Sullivan, of course. And in the next hour, so we are here for another 2 hours, but in the next hour, I'm going to be talking about two-tier sentencing a little bit more with David Spencer, who's head of crime and justice at the Policy Exchange. And later, we're also going to be looking at this claim that a quarter of Britons are now disabled. What a load of old nonsense. 25% of Britain is disabled. Talk about the sick man of Europe. Do you remember that phrase from a few years ago? So I'm going to be talking about that with John McTernan, who's a former Labour advisor. No idea what he's going to think, but it's just on the left. Maybe he thinks it's fine. Just if you're disabled, or faking it rather, as many do, by my contention, take as many benefits as you can probably get your hands on. Don't bother working, and the rest of us will pay for it. That seems to be the attitude of some. Not all, I'll qualify, not all. I'm all for anyone that is disabled and genuinely can't work. Of course, you should have and be entitled to benefits. My problem is with those that are not telling the truth, those that are faking it. Let's talk to Alan Tolhurst now. Let's talk about some of the stories we've already touched on in terms of two-tier sentencing, which has really irritated me, and it looks by the text and the phone calls that we're taking that it's irritated you too. And also, my war on France. Alan, what do you think about my suggestion that we go to war with France over their attitude? They're sticking two fingers up at us with regard to them not helping us at all, as they were contracted to do so by way of preventing illegal migration from boats. What do you think of my suggestion?
Well, as someone who holds dual British and French nationality, I think I would probably stay fairly neutral in Russell's war against
do you know
France,
what, Alan?
I'm afraid.
And I should have seen, on my sheet here, it says Alain, not Alan, and I should have tumbled, shouldn't I? I wish you were in the studio. I'd have an arm wrestle with you right now.
Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds like the best way to sort of deal with these issues. No, I think it's really interesting, and actually, it kind of plays into some. I've spoken to Home Office ministers in previous administrations in Tory governments who've always felt that perhaps the French were not as helpful as perhaps they would often suggest. Actually, that every few months the Home Secretary or the Immigration Minister would sign this agreement on kind of more funding or more kind of like sharing of intelligence and work with police to try and prevent boats crossing. But they always kind of felt a little bit like they weren't really able to get enough kind of support, and obviously those boats were unable to to stop those boats from being crossed. And so obviously we're still seeing now.
Well, we could, but we just choose not to, right?
Right, and I think there's there was the rhetoric was often tough about how tough they were going to be, but obviously we continue to see those boats cross across the channel and continue to do so, and so I can understand why there continues to be some frustration in the Home Office with the French and not being able to tackle some of these problems.
So Alain, and I will say Alain now, not Alan, whose side are you on if you really had to pick a side?
Well, as a journalist, I will maintain some neutrality in all matters, I'm afraid. I'm going to give you all those answers.
Why? Have an opinion. That's what this channel is all about, opinion.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, obviously, clearly, the impact, obviously, the continued illegal migration is having, both on France, obviously, and the UK, obviously, is not a good thing, and there needs to be a way of kind of tackling this in the long term. As I say, there's always been really kind of strong rhetoric, and as we're seeing from kind of stop the boats to smash the gangs, but obviously it's not really working. We're still seeing large numbers coming across, and the kind of the impact that's been having on failing to tackle with it at kind of both ends. And I think that there has to be some better cooperation. I think post-Brexit, obviously, we saw breaking down relationships with Europe, but obviously there would still need to be a strong security relationship beyond kind of the migrant problem elsewhere as well. Yeah. And I think that there needs to be better cooperation, I think, rather than, kind of continued antagonistic. And I would be,
I think we should start by asking for our £500 million back, or as Stephen Wolfe was saying earlier on, it's actually £2 billion now since 2014. And did you see, related to this story, The Sun, brilliant expose today. So if you haven't seen it, go out and grab a copy of The Sun. The fact that they've kind of travelled with these migrants and have been told by the migrants that they were offered VIP upgrades on their boat. So extra legroom, I kid you not, extra legroom for a few more quid. And I joked earlier, maybe an in-boat meal, maybe a movie, Titanic or something, perhaps. I mean, that is absolutely ludicrous, isn't it, in terms of how we are being played by the smugglers, by the French, by the British government, and by everybody, it seems.
Oh yeah, sounds more enjoyable than my last Ryanair flight, to be honest. But no, I think I think you're right, and clearly, you know, there's this kind of, I say, there's rhetoric about smashing the gangs. Obviously, we have seen lots of arrests and kind of continued prosecution, but we know that while people continue to think that they are able to make it to the UK and continue to enjoy what they think is a kind of a generous system in the UK, I think there's lots of debate about whether it really is, but clearly there is that belief amongst people who are travelling from places to the UK that it would be a generous place to go.
Migrants are calling it, Alan. Migrants are calling it infinitely generous, and that we are kind and we are tolerant, and that we are the only country to get to on the basis that we are so soft and generous versus France, Italy, Germany, all of the other places that these migrants could kind of end up. So surely the answer to this, and we spent the last hour or so talking to people about what the solution might be to this, it's simply just to take those incentives away, isn't it? You know, the 46 quid a week in cash, and, you know, the free house and the free health care, and, you know, the driving lessons that we hear that some councils in their wisdom are providing to asylum seekers. I mean, whatever next. Surely that's just the answer, isn't it?
Well, I think one of the issues that I've dealt with a lot with dealing with these kind of stories is that, you know, when people come to the UK, they're not able to, while they're still waiting for their decision on asylum or their visa to be made, they're not able to get a national insurance card and therefore work legally. So therefore, the state is beholden to kind of help them out in terms of obviously places to live and obviously money to live on. And the fact is that would kind of make sense if people were only waiting a few weeks for their decision, but often people are waiting months and months. So therefore, that bill kind of continues to rack up. And there's those things you talked about, kind of driving lessons and all that kind of stuff. You know, clearly, obviously, that is about trying to integration. If someone is coming to this country, we want to be able to make them so they stay and to be productive when they're here. Obviously, I guess, you know, given obviously the constrained financial stuff, it does seem as though that's when people start to feel kind of antagonistic and feel that though people are kind of, you know, jumping the queue or getting benefits that they would not be able to access as a UK national. And I think that it's understandable people do kind of feel that way. But at the same time, we do want people who come to this country for the right reasons to be able
people
to
that can contribute. Yes, absolutely. And I don't think there's any sane argument that suggests that there should be no immigration to this country, but it should be at our choosing, and it should be people that contribute. Talking about people that contribute, or not, as the case may be politically, Angela Rayner, story today, which is the irony of this, Alan, the irony. Angela Rayner's staff are going to go on strike because the head of the department, it seems, whether it's her or the permanent secretary, has demanded that they, I mean, shock horror, that they should return to the office to do some work.
Yeah, it's interesting, obviously, that she's in charge of bringing in kind of probably the most kind of generous set of kind of workers' rights.
The Workers' Rights Act,
Yeah, completely, and obviously some of that is being utilised against her own department, who are pushing back against this kind of mandate to return to the office. The story is not simply about returning to the office. It's the fact that this department her department has more kind of offices outside of Whitehall, outside of London, than most departments. And actually, there's an issue where they're closing some offices and opening some others, and so it's about where
because it's the Department of Communities, Housing and Local Government. So
exactly,
by very definition, obviously, because the housing brief is so regional, I suppose, so spread as is, you know, of course, communities. Yes, it's a bit fragmented.
Exactly. And so it's not simply about whether getting all kind of civil servants into their desk in Whitehall. It's about kind of where they're moving to around the country. And obviously that is an issue that lots of companies have in terms of trying to get people where they kind of work. And so there clearly is this kind of issue. But yeah, I mean, it would be quite ironic if they're unable to push through what they want to do because of laws they have themselves pushing through. But,
ironic and hilarious, I think, that Angela Rayner, the architect of the Workers' Rights Act, which actually has, by the way, at its core, people's right, inverted commas, to choose pretty much where they work. They can work from home, they can work from the beach, do whatever they want, you know, no matter how unproductive that is. Her own staff have been called in, which is kind of in deference to that new act, but are going to go on strike as a consequence of that diktat. I mean, I'm all for flexibility and giving people a bit of trust, but at the same time, if you've signed an employment contract years ago that says that you will work in Whitehall 9 to 5, 5 days a week, then do you know what? You've signed up to it. That's what you've got to do.
Yeah, you know, thankfully Angela Rayner seems like she's the sort of person that could take a joke on this. If it does, she'll probably see the funny side of it. But yeah, you're right. It does. You know, these are kind of struggles that lots of companies.
Alan, is that what you're saying? She just doesn't care.
No. I know, but you know, lots of companies are kind of facing this, and it is really interesting to see that kind of at the sharp end of it, the government itself having to face this stuff, because there are other departments as well. You know, the Treasury has set up this campus up in Darlington. There's lots of issue about which people are going to go up and work there, which kind of continue to want to work from home, or what kind of work from the area rather than being kind of down in London. And it's, you know, it's a microcosm microcosm of what the country is facing in general, and there is this kind of backlash against the kind of hybrid working from home model that obviously came in with the pandemic. And I think it is really interesting to see whether these kind of reforms, what that leads to. Obviously the government has had this massive push for increased productivity. Is this going to lead to increased productivity? There are lots of studies that say that allowing people that flexibility does work. Obviously, lots of people would think that working from home is often kind of skiving from home.
All of the studies I've seen show that it's more productive to actually be kind of supervised, semi-supervised within an office work environment. That's where cultures get bred, because you can't really breed a culture when people are working at home. But of course, the other consideration here is that this is against a backdrop of a spring statement where Rachel Reeves, our hapless Chancellor, said that she wants to save up to £5 billion in the civil service with a voluntary redundancy scheme. They're very, very lucky, this lot, actually, Angela Rayner's department, that it doesn't become a compulsory redundancy scheme, because if I was in charge, it would be, because I think you can cut the civil service by about 100,000 people from the current 520,000. So they're playing a dangerous game here, I think, Angela Rayner's staff, on the basis that if they push it too far, they might just get sacked.
Well, I think they know at the moment how difficult it is actually to force people out of the civil service. That's one of the big things people within the civil service say themselves. Is the massive problem is that's the problem, is that the systems in place for managing people out are actually really difficult. That you get basically there's no way kind of, unless it's kind of for sort of gross misconduct, it's very hard to push people out. They end up on this kind of 6-month performance review system, and at the end of it, then they can be forced out. But I was speaking to someone who worked in the civil service saying that what you can do is that sort of halfway through that period, if you then see an uptick in your performance, it effectively kind of resets the clock on that 6 months. So it can take a really long time to push people out.
That's modern liberal fluff, and I know it's not you setting those rules. You're just explaining what the rules are.
No, but I think that's what. But what I would do. I'm saying it's not a system that people within the civil service think is a good thing.
No, Alan. Do you know what I would do, and what would happen in the private sector? I would go to the person holding the checkbook, so the chief financial officer or the treasury in the case of the public sector, and I would say, how much is it going to cost me to sack 100,000 people on Monday? And obviously, I'm going to choose those that are useless, those that refuse to come in, those that are renegades, those that also refuse to take instruction from ministers, and of course, look, there will be an unfair dismissal tribunal process, but that has a maximum, of whatever it is, £50,000, £60,000. I would calculate that, put that to one side, and on Monday sack them. I mean, I'm serious. That's what we need to do. We've got to stop pussyfooting around with these people that effectively are destroying the public sector, destroying our strength and productivity, and it is the tail wagging the dog. These civil service employees should just do as they're damn well told.
I think the problem with that is, obviously, as you rightly point out, it would be pretty costly in terms of how much it would cost to do. Obviously, it would be an upfront cost. You would have savings kind of later on with a smaller civil service. The problem then is also that the government relies on the civil service, on public servants, to enact their policies and to deliver what they want to do. And obviously, they want to kind of build trust that some was eroded during the previous Conservative government. I don't necessarily think that coming in and just sacking 100,000 people would necessarily engender the sort of trust that the government is looking for with Whitehall.
Save a load of money.
I think that is also kind of the problem.
And we've only got a couple of minutes left. Let's move on to something else that I want to talk to you about. In fact, two other things that are kind of distantly related. One is a new prison opened this week, which the Labour Party, of course, are taking credit for. Who knew that you could conceive, get planning permission and build a prison in 9 months? Guess what? It's because it was conceived by the previous Conservative government. 1,500 places. It was opened yesterday by the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. But only 1,500 places, and because of that very, very tiny contribution to our 85,000 prison space pool of availability, we now have news that back to where we were a few months ago, the government are now considering the early release of dangerous criminals. Once again, do you remember that they did this back in the summer? Because there aren't enough prison places, because we're now at 99% capacity. What is it about building loads more prisons that politicians don't understand?
And as you say, this new one, which while welcome, barely touches the sides and will not help with that overall number. And there have been, over the last sort of 20-30 years especially, there has been a really, really kind of a complete slowdown of building, because there was they didn't want to spend the money on it. But it's such a false economy, because you're now leading to this point where you're having to take really kind of drastic, draconian, remedial measures. And we kind of saw this coming a few months ago when, as you say, the first kind of set of early release schemes were in place. It was saying, well, this is all very well and good now, but in a few months you're going to have to go back to the well and start to do all over again. And at some point you're going to run out of those people who are on the shorter sentences, and you're going to end up with the people who are on the longer sentences, who therefore by their very nature are going to have been convicted of much more serious violent crimes.
And let's be clear that they are a danger to the public. That's what prison is for. Prison is not just about rehabilitation and fluffy liberal nonsense. It's also about protecting people from criminals. It's also about punishment. You know, no tellies in cells, no PlayStations, you know, no open prisons where you can get a takeaway delivered by delivery on a Saturday night. That's a real thing, by the way. I mean, we need to start being tough. But what we shouldn't be doing is using the lack of prison resources in terms of places as an excuse to let dangerous people out to reoffend, because guess what? A large percentage of them do. Talking of which, the final thing I wanted to talk to you about, Alan, is this prolific shoplifter that has been caught again. 4 counts of shoplifting, goes to court. The sum total of £19,000 worth of goods stolen. And again, as I said earlier on in the show, not bread, not cheese, not tins of baked beans to feed a family of 3 or 4 on hard times. This is, you know, Nike shoes, this is kind of, you know, Gap jeans, this is iPhones, this is expensive stuff that then gets sold, presumably to fuel a lifestyle, maybe other things, but gets to court and the judge decides not to incarcerate this individual, even though this individual has been prosecuted and imprisoned for shoplifting before, because, drum roll, shock horror, they played the mental health card.
Yeah, I mean, look, clearly someone who has this kind of impulse may have, you know, kleptomania or something like that, but the whole point
is
about
that really a thing? That's
system,
just someone that wants to nick stuff, isn't
it? Well, yeah, potentially so, but my point is more that, like, if you believe that this person, you know, has a mental illness, but they still obviously committed these crimes, as you say, pretty serious amounts of shoplifting. You know, the whole point of the justice system is, as you say, the punishment, but also rehabilitation. If this person does have a mental illness, then you should be able to sentence them in a way that means that they get the help to be able to prevent them from doing this, because clearly it is an impulse, because they've done it many times
well, surely then the answer is,
no one will stop them from doing it.
If they are a criminal, and bearing in mind there are victims here, right? There's rarely such thing as a victimless crime. This, by the way, Melissa Grant is her name, 55 years old, appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court yesterday, charged with those 4 counts of theft from Selfridges. So again, this is not, you know, Poundland, this is not Tesco. She's nicking stuff from Selfridges at, you know, very expensive stuff. So yeah, Melissa Grant, part of a gang that was dubbed the Spice Girls. They're so prolific. They've got a nickname. So, you know, she doesn't have mental health issues such that she can't find a way to Selfridges and to the shoe department and the expensive boutique clothes department. But this judge, whoever it is, I don't think the judge is named here, unfortunately. The prosecutors are, but not the judge. Yes, lets her off. So I would suggest if she has a serious mental health issue such that she's a criminal, that maybe she's just locked up in a secure mental health facility. That would be the answer, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, you know, clearly, as you say, she's been in prison before, and that's not prevented her from reoffending. So clearly, something else does need to be done. I'm not necessarily whether she needs to be kind of locked up for her and kind of in that sense, but
for
necessarily,
our safety, not hers. I don't think shopkeepers should have to put prices up to the public because they're getting loads of their stuff nicked every week.
Yeah, and obviously shoplifting has become a kind of real salient issue because everyone does feel as though it's just not being dealt with correctly. Like, it's not being policed in a way that gives anyone any confidence that, you know, it's going to be dealt with. And people think that essentially it's kind of a free for all, especially if you steal kind of small amounts. It's obviously women went a lot beyond that, but clearly, you know, I think people are going to read this and be emboldened and think that, you know, even if you shoplift large amounts, you're still not going to be incarcerated. So it doesn't really send out the right message, given that we know how you know how much of a problem shoplifting continues to be at this moment.
And again, look, you know, on the mental health side, you know, she was compass mentis enough to understand the value of 4 Optica shirts valued at £2,800, 2 designer bags that were worth a total of £4,700. So, you know, she seems to be of presence of mind enough not to be nicking stuff that's too cheap. 5 Castley shirts to the value of £6,000, a £1,800 medium logo bag, and a £325 oblique Bylon cap. Wow, sorry, a baseball cap for £325. Wow. And an Alalia dress, whatever that is, for £2,650. So she's definitely got good judgment as a shoplifter, isn't she?
Yeah, look, and I don't want to come off as kind of a bleeding heart liberal. I've not seen kind of the kind of reports that were clearly done for the prosecution when they led them to this decision not to prosecute in this way. So I don't really know what this woman's kind of state of mind is or what the kind of rest of her life looks like.
A state of mind is criminal, I think.
Right, but yeah, clearly, beyond that, there has to be something that can be done, because if nothing is done, this woman who obviously has a history of shoplifting will continue to do so. Yeah, so I do think I might just get looked at again.
It's very, very much a question of we're looking after the perpetrators more than we're looking after the victims, and that is Britain in 2025, Alan, isn't it? So I'll say au revoir and merci beaucoup. And
well, look, if I'm in the news building anytime, we'll get that arm wrestle done.
Let's get that arm wrestle done. We must record it, and we'll assume that whoever wins, that's Britain versus France. And if you win, my friend, I'll stop calling for a war on France to stop the migrants. Alan, thank you very much indeed. It's been fun. Cheers. Many thanks indeed. OK, we're going to take another break. Back with your calls and texts after this. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
Britain has got a very major growth problem. The headline numbers actually exaggerate what the real position is. Why do I say that? I say that because actually what matters isn't the headline number, is growth per head of population, the per capita.
And the population is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger by the year.
It is.
And not from birth, from boats and from visas.
Absolutely correct. So if you look at the last 5 years, per capita growth, per head growth has not increased at all.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back and thanks for joining me for the rest of the show. I'm here till 4 o'clock, filling in for Ian Collins. This is Russell Quirk and enjoying myself as I am. What a fast-paced show, and thank you for your contribution. Lots and lots of calls and lots of texts around two-tier sentencing, which we're going to talk about a little bit more shortly with David Spencer, and also this my proposed war on France. Yes, of course, I'm being tongue-in-cheek. I'm not suggesting that we really go to war with them, but I think we should go to war with them with regards to words, because they're taking the mickey out of us, taking our money, telling us that they're going to do things to stop migrants coming from their country to ours, and they're not doing it. They are enabling that situation. They are propelling those migrants effectively across the channel. OK, well, let's go to the phone lines now and see what you think of what we've been talking about over the last hour and a half ago. Let's speak to Andrew in Halifax, shall we? Andrew, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Russell.
Hi.
Well, any government that had any sort of backbone would say to the French, right, well, OK, so when the next round of fishing licences comes up for renewal, we will renew licences for French vessels to fish in British waters on a case-by-case basis. And for every boat you allow into our waters, we will rescind one of the licenses for your fishing boats. If you are determined to culturally and demographically ruin this country, then we'll make sure that we ruin your fishing industry in the process.
So you're suggesting we go head-to-head, boat to boat, as such? Boat, literally one boat versus one boat. I think that's a brilliant idea.
Absolutely. But the problem is, and this is why I was so delighted listening to Stephen Wolfe earlier, that guy's brilliant.
He's good.
He is saying what I have said for many, many years. All of this is ideological. Andrew Nether let it out of the bag, 15, 20 years ago, when he said that the purpose of all this was to rub the right's nose in diversity, and by goodness me, haven't we had just that? And I think that the reason is, Russell, and I think that all of the mainstream parties are ideologically committed to this, because a culturally fractured society, or what they would call a multicultural society, but I call it culturally fractured, a culturally fractured society is easier for the political class to control.
Well, and to divide and conquer via, right? Because if you divide, and I guess, and look, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, either of us, I'm sure, but if you divide and then as a consequence of that division create problems, and then you see yourselves as a government as the solution to that problem, then you have your population leaning into you. So, yeah, I think there might be some merit in what you're saying there. And you sound like you're better informed than I am when it comes to the specialist subjects of fishing boats in the Channel. It's almost like a mastermind thing, isn't it? Do we have to allow the French still to fish in our waters? And are they particularly fertile? Are they particularly desirable?
Well, the political class have done this marvellous smoke and mirrors job, Russell, over the last few years of pretending that they are powerless in the face of treaties, etc. We signed up to this treaty, therefore we can't do this, that, and the other. Our hands are tied. We live under our parliamentary. I've got a degree in politics, so I know something about the system. Our parliament is sovereign. Yeah. Basically, Parliament here can do what it likes. Now, there may be consequences to some of the decisions that it makes internationally, but it can do what it likes. There is no law of political physics that prevents Parliament from legislating on anything.
Well, they are the legislators. So, for instance, we could legislate to repeal the Human Rights Act from 1998, which incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights. Then we wouldn't have all of these issues that we have right now in terms of people saying that because they're an alcoholic, even though they're a migrant and they rape someone, they can't be sent back to Syria because of the Human Rights Act that we decide and have decided to keep in place. No, you're absolutely right. Why do you think we don't do that, Andrew?
Because there isn't the political will. I mean, look at the argument they always bring up, the sacred, the gold-plated Belfast Agreement. Well, that incorporates the human rights. Well, there's already been changes to the Belfast Agreement. It was the method by which First and Deputy First Minister elected was changed with the St Andrews Agreement. So there was a change to that. This is what I mean about politicians. If they want to do something, they will do it. The problem is all parties are ideological. Apart from Reform, I would say Reform are different. But all the mainstream parties in this country have been committed to culturally and demographically changing this country beyond recognition for 20 years, and they're not going to allow anything to stop them.
Andrew, let me just pick you up on the Reform thing. I mean, you say Reform are different. Isn't Reform the party now that's led by Nigel Farage that says he no longer believes in mass deportations? I mean, that's quite a U-turn, isn't it, for someone like Nigel Farage, that has been the creator of Brexit, the man amongst everyone that sits at the top of the debate and has done for the last 20 years with regard to immigration. So, I mean, there is an argument, there is a fear, I think, even amongst hardened Reform supporters, that actually Reform is moving to the left and going a bit woke, presumably so as to look more electable and not so extreme when it comes to trying to gather up a few more voters ready for the next general election. So maybe Reform are just the same as the Conservatives and Labour?
Well, if they are, then they're destined to go the same way as the Conservatives. I think that mass deportation, and I will say this quite openly, is absolutely essential if we are going to keep a semblance of the country that I grew up in the 80s and 90s. If we are going to keep that, and not see it utterly destroyed by what the political class have been allowed to happen here demographically over the last 20 years. I think mass deportations are an absolute essential.
Andrew, I'll second that. Thank you for your call. That was brilliant. Very, very enjoyable at all. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to revisit this question, this subject of two-tier sentencing and this outrageous diktat, the tail wagging the dog, where we now have a quango of 15 people that are unelected telling us how we should sentence people that break into our country, effectively. So I'm going to be talking to David Spencer, the head of crime and justice at Policy Exchange, after this break. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Talk. I'm Russell Quirk in for Ian Collins, here till 4 o'clock. Let's now talk again about two-tier sentencing with an expert, David Spencer, who's head of crime and justice at Policy Exchange. He's also a former Metropolitan Police officer. David, thanks for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
So what do you make of this then? So this was a story at the beginning of the week, David, where the Sentencing Council, 15 of them, Sentencing Council members, decided to publish the fact that they think that those that breach migration rules and laws should be treated with kid gloves. It seems that the Justice Secretary has gone back and said, actually, I'm uncomfortable with this. I think that people, funnily enough, should be treated equally no matter who they are or where they come from, the law being fair and equitable, no fear, no favour, so to speak. And the Sentencing Council today have come back and said to Ms Mahmood, no, sorry, we think this is how it should be. So, A, what do you make of that? B, who on earth do these people think they are? I mean, they're not accountable, they're not elected, they have, yes, no accountability to us as the electorate. How on earth can the tail be wagging the dog like this?
Well, the furore that's come up today is about pre-sentence reports in the guideline that the Sentencing Council have issued, and who, the phrase they use is who should normally receive or be the subject of pre-sentence reports. And as you indicate, there's all sorts of groups on that, but it includes those from an ethnic, faith or cultural minority. And the Justice Secretary has unsurprisingly said that she's not very happy with that. She wants to see that changed, and the Sentencing Council have said, no, we're not going to change it. And you touch on the wider policy issue here, which is that this is what we're looking at here is not about individual sentencing of offenders, of criminals. What we're looking at is the overarching policy framework here. So it's about the overarching policy and the approach that the state takes to dealing with these people rather than individual sentences. And because it's an overarching policy, that is rightly the purview of government, ministers and parliament. So it's pretty astounding that, as you say, this arm's length body today, after being asked by the Lord Chancellor perfectly reasonably a week or so ago to relook and reconsider the guideline, that the Sentencing Council has come back today and said, no, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to ignore what you want, Lord Chancellor, and we're just going to push ahead. And it's pretty remarkable. I think what's really interesting about this case as well is that this isn't really a party political issue. There's a lot of ding-dong in the Houses of Parliament and the House of Commons about it. But actually, it's not a party political issue, because what we find is that the Lord Chancellor, Shabana Mahmood, and the Shadow Lord Chancellor, Robert Jenrick, both basically agree that the Sentencing Council have completely overstepped the market.
But on both issues, so just to be clear, there are two issues here as far as I'm concerned. You know, one is the introduction of almost mandatory pre-sentencing reports for those of an ethnic minority, but then also the other issue around immigration law breaking. In other words, there are two separate issues here, but both are being advised by way of the Sentencing Council that in both instances judges should be much more lenient. So this isn't just one issue, this is two. By the way, we have just received a statement which has come from Downing Street, which, David, I should just read. Keir Starmer is ready to change the law to block two-tier sentencing rules after judges defied him by keeping them in place. Downing Street said just now all options are on the table, including emergency legislation, as the government reviews the role and the powers of the Sentencing Council. Wow, this is good news, isn't it? And very practical, very welcome. The escalating row between ministers and the judiciary comes after the council has just proposed rules that would have required judges to consider the ethnicity of criminals when passing sentences. The council refused to reconsider their view, despite a backlash from ministers, including Sir Keir and Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary. So it does look, I mean, despite it not being political, you're right, it's kind of cross-party in terms of their objection to this. But Keir Starmer actually has grown a pair by the looks of it. It looks like he is going to rail against this and prevent this, can we call them a rogue sentencing council, from doing what they think is right and effectively imposing two-tier justice on Britain.
Well, the Sentencing Council, of course, was set up by the last Labour government back in through legislation in 2009. They started their work in 2010, and they were set up by an Act of Parliament. So Parliament set them up, and frankly, if Parliament wants to, they can.
It could get rid of them.
Well, if Parliament wants to, that's exactly what they
Let's talk about them quickly. I mean, there's 15 members of this Sentencing Council. Again, I'll keep saying it, they are unelected. They are therefore unaccountable. They have a mandate, but not from the people. They have a mandate, as you say, from Parliament. They seem to be able to shout the odds and do exactly what they want. There's a president. There's 14 other council members that range from judges, also through magistrates, justices of the peace, lawyers, a chief constable, and so on. A former Director of Public Prosecutions, and so on. And the problem is, I mean, I'm not sure if there's any checks and balances with regard to this particular gaggle of individuals in terms of, you know, who they are and how they are put in place. What's the vetting? Do we make sure that actually, a bit like they have in the United States with the Supreme Court, on which 9 justices sit, you know, there's a lot made of the makeup demographically, politically of those members to ensure that justice is put out democratically, that it is set out and dispensed in a proper, balanced way. I don't think anyone seems to know where the likes of Her Honour Judge Amanda Rippon and Stephen Parkinson and Chief Constable Rob Nixon and District Judge Magistrates Court Stephen Leake and the Honourable Mrs Justice May, they're just some of the names, how they get appointed. I mean, can you enlighten us as to where these people are taken from and what the criteria is?
So all of this is set down in legislation in the Coroners and Justice Act 2009, and there's 8 members of the council are judges of one form or another, and 6 members are called non-judicial members, and they're sort of people with experience of the system, like policing, probation, criminal defence, criminal prosecution, including the Director of Public Prosecutions is on the board there on the council. So all of this is set down by statute. And so I go back to the point, if government wants to and Parliament wants to change the way the Sentencing Council operates, they're well within their rights to do so.
Well, it looks like Keir Starmer is going to do that, and it might be one of the first things in 9 months that Keir Starmer does that I actually agree with. It looks like he's going to take them to task. And I guess, look, this is a threat. This is a warning shot across the bows of the Sentencing Council to say, look, if you don't accept the will of ministers, which, by the way, the will of ministers should be the will of the people, then ultimately I'm going to invoke emergency legislation and I may well get rid of you. I should also read, there is a Sentencing Council statement which is very short, very ambiguous, frankly. It says the Sentencing Council has given very careful consideration to the Lord Chancellor's request to amend or reconsider its recently published revised guideline, imposition of community or custodial sentences. The Council has written to the Lord Chancellor to explain why we have decided not to make the requested changes. So it doesn't say why they've decided not to make the requested changes, it just tells us they've written to say that they won't be making the requested changes. That doesn't seem very transparent, does it?
No, well, I mean, the letters that they've sent are pretty lengthy, but I've got to say...
Have you seen them?
They include, yeah, I've seen the letters, and, you know, they're pretty lengthy letters.
What's the reasoning then? Just tell us, can you summarise what the reasoning is, David, in terms of the Sentencing Council decided to defy a Minister of the Crown?
Well, the justification is pretty flimsy, to be honest. They've taken the view that this is what they think should happen, and that it is entirely within their purview to do so, despite the fact that this is about an overarching policy matter. And they have, you know, you talked about them getting a shot across the bow. Well, the reality is the Sentencing Council had a shot across the bow 2 weeks ago, has had the opportunity to make changes, has chosen not to do so. And so we're well past the point of shot on the bow, across the bow now. Where we are now is, as the Prime Minister said and the Secretary of State for Justice has indicated, we're now well beyond that. We're now time for emergency legislation to get this dealt with, because the reality is the guideline that we're talking about pre-sentence reports, comes into effect on Tuesday. People being sentenced in court on Tuesday will be subject to this guideline. So if the government wants to change it, they need to get legislation moving very, very quickly.
And David, just for those of us that have not been in policing and are not legally qualified, what are the implications of automatically mandating that everyone from an ethnic minority must go through pre-sentencing reports? I mean, we've heard a lot over the last day or two that means that person is likely then to receive a diluted sentence. Just explain why that is the case. Is that true? Is that correct?
Well, pre-sentence reports are prepared usually by a probation officer, and they can either be in writing or they can be delivered orally in court. But it's basically an assessment based by that probation officer about the offender, and it can be about their their risk to the public, their risk to themselves, the likelihood of them committing other crimes, whether they would respond to a community order or whether they should just go straight to prison. So it's a whole load of background that gets presented to the court. And then the court, particularly in borderline cases, can then say, well, having read the report, I think actually I'm going to either suspend the sentence or I'm going to subject you to a community order, or do not pass go straight to prison. And these pre-sentence reports can be really critical in borderline cases as to whether someone ends up going to prison or whether they end up doing a non-custodial sentence. And that's where, whether it's automatic or, as the Sentencing Council say, would normally be required. That's why it's so important, because if you are from an ethnic, faith or cultural minority, as the Sentencing Council describes it, then you would normally be entitled to a pre-sentence report. If you can't fit yourself into one of these cohorts that they've listed for their own reasons, then I'm afraid no pre-sentence report for you unless the judge explicitly decides to do so.
And David, would you unequivocally agree that this is the very epitome of two-tier justice?
Well, I certainly think that if it's not the epitome of it, then I don't know what is.
So that's a yes.
We hear time and again people from the criminal justice world telling us that two-tier justice, two-tier sentencing, two-tier policing doesn't exist. And then we look at all of this, and it is unsurprising that people come away from it thinking, actually, no, we do have a two-tier system here. It is completely unsurprising.
Well, I wonder if we have for a while, and because the Sentencing Council members have seen that playing out in practicality, they now believe that they can formalise it because it's been playing out. Now, of course, this puts Keir Starmer in a very, very sticky position because he has said at the lectern very publicly that it doesn't exist, as you say, that there is no such thing as two-tier policing, which there is, no such thing as two-tier justice, which there is. He has to now stand up, whether he believes in this or not, doesn't he, to say that he's going to stop this, because otherwise it shows that all along he realised there was, and he's putting his kind of, thumbprint of approval on this reckless sentencing council, as a consequence. So he's really got to stand up and make sure he wins this battle, isn't he?
Well, that's why it's so positive that him and the Lord Chancellor have come out today unequivocally and said they're going to take action and that all options are on the table. I think there's nothing about the Prime Minister has said or the Secretary of State for Justice said that I don't support. They absolutely need to take action, and if they do, they will absolutely have my support in doing so.
Well, justice clearly should be fair and even-handed. It is as simple as that. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what race you are, what gender you are, what age you are. Obviously, it is obvious, right the way back to the Magna Carta, that justice should be dispensed evenly and by way of balance. That is an obvious thing to say, but what we're seeing here in Britain, played out on the streets and now played out by way of some otherwise, you would imagine, intelligent, sensible people of the Sentencing Council in formal terms too. I hope that the Sentencing Council are either disbanded or the constitution of that council is changed so that they are elected. I'd love to know how they are appointed, whether they are vetted for political affiliation, because it seems to me like they're a bunch of left-leaners. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it looks like. David Spencer, Head of Crime and Justice Policy Exchange, thank you very much indeed. Proper expert there. We're going to take a break and then we're going to speak to some more experts, which is you lot on the phones. Back after this.
Buckingham Palace obviously play this down because they don't want everybody, jumping up and saying, what's happening to the king. But I think it does happen. We don't know what kind of cancer he has because he's been very careful not to say, so he's not associated with just one type of cancer. But obviously he's in the position that the tiniest thing that they might be worried about, they're going to pop him into hospital.
Across the UK, on DAB+, On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. We're going to go to the phones in a sec. Just a couple of quick texts to read out just based on the conversation I just had with David there with regard to this rogue sentencing council, aren't they? Let me know what you think. Do you think they're rogue? I mean, they seem to be completely unaccountable, completely left-leaning. They're certainly not doing what ministers and Parliament are telling them to do. 0344 499 1000. Let me know what you think. Send us a voice note maybe on WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000 again. Or as many of you have done, send a text, 87222. Helen says, the sentencing council are paid by us, the taxpayer. Sack them. Well, that was a succinct text, Helen, and many will agree. And Joe in Cornwall says we should impose a statistical review of all these judges' sentencing, and if based on that there are unconscious bias, they should then be reprimanded and sent on an anti-racism course and put on improvement-needed probational periods for 12 months, leading to termination of the role if not improved. Yes, well, again, that's what we would call accountability, Joe, but it doesn't seem to be much, does it? I mean, not only are they out of touch, it seems, with the public, but again, as the French are doing to us on migration, the sentencing council are literally sticking two fingers up at us via ministers and Parliament. Absolutely outrageous. Right, let's go to the phones. Let's speak to Barry in Paisley in Scotland. Barry, welcome to the show. Thanks for calling.
How's it going, Russell? How you doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm enjoying the show, I have to say. It's very, very busy. You're one of many, many callers, so well done for getting through. What did you want to talk about? Migration, I think.
Yeah. So I'm looking to talk about the illegal migrant crisis. I feel as if it's starting to create some sort of mental health issue in me. I'm waking up every day, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm depressed.
Well, Barry, you probably get a free car from Motability for a start.
Well, yeah, that'd be true. But look, you're seeing the news every day. We're seeing foreign fighting age, backwards thinking cavemen arriving on the shoreline. There seems to be nothing at all that's happening about it. So people like myself, like-minded individuals like myself, are probably spread across the country, and they're feeling like there's nothing at all that they can do about this. So I'm proposing that there's some sort of call to action made to the civilian population of the UK. My English cousins start to get out onto the shoreline, patrol the beaches, and we need to try and repel these men back into the sea.
Hang on. So do you mean like in the United States, where you've got the unofficial civilian action force across the American border, across Arizona and Texas? Are you suggesting, and we need to be very careful here that we're not seen to be inciting anything. I'm sure you're not doing that, Barry, but you're talking about almost a call to action by civilians to try and stand there on the beaches at Dover and to, when you say repel and put them back in the sea, you mean turn the boats around and push them back into the channel?
Turn the boats around, push them back into the channel. We've all seen the images, families sitting on beaches with their buckets and their spades, and then the next thing you know, there's a boat arrives and there's fighting age men jumps off that must be extremely intimidating and scary. We need people just like ourselves, normal individual men, to patrol the beaches, and should that happen, we need to just push them back into the sea. And I'm pretty sure that after a period of time, that would act as a deterrent in itself. We need to try and take matters into our own hands legally, within the realms of the law.
Of course.
I'm pretty sure that over the history of this country, if there's ever been a foreign force of any kind landing on our shoreline...
Well, it's only happened twice, Barry. It happened with the Vikings.
This country have got author... Well...
And the Normans. It's only happened twice. But do you think the very act, Barry...
Take every single boat into...
Sorry, Barry, I think there's a bit of a delay on the line. Do you think the very act of having, dozens and dozens of civilians standing guard and, yes, making sure that they are within the law would actually be sufficient deterrent for those smugglers and the migrants themselves not to make the journey? Barry,
I do, yes. Yeah. And I think we've reached a point that we've got to give it a shot. The government's doing nothing, the police is doing nothing, so I think the time has come where we should look to try and do something for ourselves.
Yeah. It has happened in history, of course, when governments let populations down, that, again, within the law, I'm being very careful here, that the public start to take things into their own hands. You're suggesting that could happen? Barry, you sure you're in Scotland and not on Mars? This delay on this line is about several seconds long. Yeah, Barry. I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm going to have to move on to another call now because this delay is kind of too impractical to contend with, I'm afraid, mate. Let's speak to Stuart, who I suspect wants to talk about the same subject. Stuart, welcome. We seem to have some gremlins in the system. Stuart, can you hear us? One more chance.
I can, yes, I can. Yeah, I want to speak about it too, and I totally agree with him that's just been on.
Okay.
That's what we need to do with everything. At the end of the day, I mean, I go a little bit farther, mate. The lifeboats, I'm punching them all. I send them all to the bottom of the sea, to be honest.
Well, yeah, that's a stupid thing to say, Stuart. You don't puncture boats with people in them. Stuart, goodbye. It's a stupid thing to say. You don't puncture the boats and let them fall to the bottom of the sea and drown people. What a ridiculous thing to say. Let's talk about text, shall we? Let's hope they're a little bit more sensible and less aggressive than Stuart there on his silly broken hands-free. David says, no idea why any UK government hasn't worked with the French and said to them, A, the UK will stop these golden benefits we provide to illegal immigrants, and B, the UK will assist the French in sending illegal immigrants in France and the UK to French Guiana, which isn't a third country, but a French territory. That will stop illegals going into France and the UK. Maybe. And a load of text here actually also about the conversation we had about stealing, about that shoplifter that got away with, yet again, stealing £19,000 worth of very, very expensive goods from Selfridges. Didn't get a prison sentence because she played the mental health card. And I'm not suggesting that people don't have mental health issues, but I am suggesting that people use mental health as an excuse to get off and avoid justice. Shoot me down in flames if you like, but I think that might happen every now and again. So we have an anonymous text here that says, I think, but I'm not sure, that stealing can be a mental illness in a small amount of people. It's called being a kleptomaniac. Yeah, look, we can label all these things. I said earlier, we can talk about oppositional defiance disorder and say that anyone that's diagnosed by some weak GP with that disorder, that almost gives them an excuse to be naughty, and in the case of primary school children and secondary school children, to disrupt class because we've labelled it so it's okay. Maybe ODD is just a consequence of I don't know, diet. It could be bad parenting. Could be that, couldn't it? Could be a contributor to it. So anyway, more text here. Trevor Jenkins says, I really like Barry's idea of a civilian guard on the beaches. Trevor in Harrow. Yeah, I get that. And look, it certainly worked to an extent back in the day in the United States where there was a civilian defence force. I think that's what it was called, actually. But you've got to be very, very careful that there isn't this kind of antagonism, because what you don't want, of course, is the media and left-wing commentators actually starting to turn on those people that are trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, but actually are seen to be inciting, are seen to be antagonistic. You've only got to cast your mind back to the streets of many of our towns and cities in the summer, where people that might have thought that they were doing the right thing by just protesting and saying things about broken Britain and so on, ended up falling foul of the law and ended up in prison. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. We'll be back in a second after the 3 o'clock news.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Okay, welcome back to the final hour. I'm here till 4 o'clock, then handing over to Peter Cardwell. Now let's talk about disabled Brits. This news, big inverted commas today, that apparently 25% of us Brits are disabled. What a load of old nonsense. Of course we're not. But when you look at the disability bill, the amount of money that is paid out now into the hands of people that are claiming sickness and disability, it is an awful lot of money. Let's get into this in a bit of detail with John McTurner now, who's a former advisor to Tony Blair. What do you think about this, John, from the point of view of the increase in those that are claiming disability since the pandemic? It is astonishingly high compared to the pandemic and costing the country dearly. What do we do about this? Or do you think that this is just all fine and bona fide?
Well, I think the government cuts that are proposed are very dangerous, taking 5,000 to 6,000 people, £5,000 to £6,000 a year away from nearly 1 million people will have a huge impact on people with disabilities. And I think that surely isn't the face of a welfare state in the 21st century.
Do you think everybody that claims sickness and disability is entitled to sickness and disability benefits as they receive them?
Yeah, I do, because they go through
everybody. No, but I mean,
they go through a rigorous process, and I'm happy that process works. I'm happy that process has people who refused and has people who appealed. But in the end, there's a process we go through. We don't sit here.
Well, even though a lot of those
we don't talk about this, chatting about it, and then go no.
Well, no, I think it's unfeasible that there's been a 53% increase in the amount of money that's paid in sickness and disability benefits since 2019. And the fact that we now have 25% of the workforce that can claim one way or the other that they're disabled. So you don't think the system's being gamed at all? There's not one person ever anywhere that is actually defrauding the taxpayer via the benefit system by pretending to be sick or disabled. You don't think that's the case?
There's a system for investigating fraud in the DWP. It's vanishingly small, but they do find people.
Yeah.
But the question is...
there is some abuse.
There's a system for investigating fraud, and people are found, and that system works fine, just as the system for deciding whether... just as the system for deciding whether or not you're eligible for personal independent payments works as well.
So, John, if we carry on this linear line, so we go from paying out 65 billion in sickness and disability benefits in 2019, it's now 100 billion. We've got 25% of the population disabled. In 5 years' time, that presumably is going to be 150 billion and, 35% of the population? Because there's a growth trend here, there's a line. I mean, what is going wrong with Britain that we are so sick and so disabled that we have to lean into the state to the tune of £100 billion?
I'm sure you understand that we're an ageing population, which means that there are more people as they get older whose ability to move and all those things is constrained. That's an actual fact of us becoming an older society. That's why the carers allowance increased. That's why all kinds of benefits related to ageing increase. Now, I'm not sure that you or I or any of the people watching us, listening to us, think that older people should have benefits taken away from them. So there's the ageing thing. The second thing is, there's absolutely no doubt the pandemic caused huge hurt to people's mental health. It was traumatic. And the fact that people are coming now and saying they have got mental health problems, which are related to that, or long-term health problems related to...
But the pandemic finished three years ago, John.
Long COVID is a real thing. Long COVID doesn't go away because it's 3 years.
So long COVID is a mental health issue as well now, is it?
Long COVID is related to chronic fatigue syndrome.
How many people have got long COVID, John?
I don't have any figures in front of me. I'm just saying there are real effects which would tell you why this country is sicker, because the pandemic made us all a bit sicker.
But do you think, in terms of that ageing population, I mean, so you've got two reasons there, COVID and an ageing population. So you think that 53% increase in benefit payments is all down to long COVID and the fact that we've got, I mean, what you're suggesting, a very rapidly ageing population. I don't deny that it's ageing, but it's not ageing to that extent, is it? So there's something else going on here, is what I'm saying.
No,
and it's clearly that the system is being gamed. I would suggest that a lot of people, given the stats, the numbers actually, where a large proportion of the increase in these claimants are those people between the ages of 20 and 49, I suggest that they've sat very lazily on their backsides during the pandemic, and the pandemic then ended and they decided they just didn't want to go to work. In fact, the survey in the press today suggests that only 25% of people that are on sickness and disability benefit who could work want to work. So this isn't all genuine at all. Come on, John, who are you kidding?
So I genuinely don't understand why you think that people who go through what is actually a humiliating process of getting personal independence payments, to pay them some small compensation for the costs of physical and mental disabilities, that those people are faking it. You've got no evidence to say they're faking it.
But you genuinely think, despite the trend in numbers, that no one's faking it apart from a small handful. You don't think anyone's gaming the system at all.
You switch from saying everyone's gaming it.
No, I haven't said everyone's gaming. I'm saying it's unfeasible, John. It's unfeasible that the increase. John,
I'm saying. What are your suggestions?
My suggestion is that the trend line, the maths of the increase.
You're suggesting for changing the system.
I'm suggesting I've got a whole bunch of other. John, I've got a whole bunch of other suggestions. Stop talking over me. I've got a whole bunch of other suggestions. So one is that the maths doesn't add up, in that the significant trend line increase of those people now claiming disability, particularly of a certain age and demographic, and particularly the amount of money that's now being claimed, an extra 35 billion every year since 2019, doesn't add up. There is no way that amount of people are claiming now in that short period of time because they're a bit older or because they've got so-called long COVID, which, by the way, we all know doesn't really exist. But anyway, let me come to my next suggestion. My next suggestion is, if you are right, John, if you are right, and all of these people are now entitled to this bounty, this huge... You think they all are. Well, you keep saying it, you think they all are. Let me ask you this then, John. Tell me this from an economic point of view. How do we afford to pay it ongoing? Not just now, but when that bill gets bigger.
That's the simplest. That's the simplest question of all.
I can't wait to hear the answer.
We grow the economy.
What, Rachel Reeves? The economy's growing at 0.1% a year. The OBR have just halved the growth forecast. So we need a new chancellor to do that, don't we?
We grow the economy the way that the OBR says the economy is going to grow
1% a year.
In years to come. It's going to come. It's got the biggest single increase by one policy action and growth is what happens because of streamlining planning, taking up planning regulations. Now, what about adding to that? Building 1 million council houses. That would add growth. There's all kinds of ways.
Who's paying for that, John?
Add growth to the economy.
Who pays for that?
It pays for itself.
No,
Every council house built.
The average house in the UK costs £200,000 to build. So you want to build 1 million of them? I mean, what's that? I mean, how many zeros? 20 billion? Where's that money come from?
And do you know what? At least half of the cost of every home built in the UK is the land. Yep. The one thing government has in heaps is land.
They do.
The MOD, one of the biggest landowners in the whole country.
John, it's the one thing we're probably going to agree on. The public sector own about 180,000 hectares of land, I can tell you that. But even if you take away the land cost, it costs £250 a square foot to build a house. So the average house in the UK is a 3-bedroom house, is 1,000 square feet. So it's going to cost you £250,000 to build each house. We're going to get the money from to pay the brickies and the tilers and the kitchen fitters to build 1 million council houses. Where are you going to get the money?
What? I and you as well can borrow against.
You want to borrow more than Rachel Reeves is already borrowing.
You can borrow against a rental stream, like everybody.
A rental stream, but council housing has a subsidised rent. How does that work?
No, if the council's built the houses and the houses are rented affordably, the return on the borrowing is higher than the borrowing.
What you think, if someone's paying 25 quid a week for a council house that's just cost £250,000 to build, that's a good return?
You find me anyone who's paying £25 a week.
I think there's a lot of people that aren't paying anything, and a lot of those people are the people we talked about at the beginning of this segment that are on sickness and benefit in the long term. So where's the money coming from? I mean, you talk about growth. I mean, the OBR have just halved the forecast for Britain's growth to 1% from 2%.
For the early years, not for the out years.
No, for next year. So where is the growth coming from?
That's 1 year and a 5-year forecast.
Yeah.
So This country, as we know, would be a lot better off if it had not been crushed by the Conservatives. 14 years of no growth, 14 years of going
That's
backwards.
not true. John, that is not correct. It's not correct at all, as a matter of fact, to say there was no growth. So in the last 4 months of the Conservative government, GDP growth was much higher than it's been in the last 4 or 5 months. Inflation was dropping. It's now risen above the Conservative level. And bear in mind, I'm not a big lover of the Conservative Party. I'm not here as a Conservative stooge. But I can tell you that we had the fastest growing economy in the GDP, by way of GDP, in the G7 until July last year. What happened in July last year?
The thing that's hit our country, and I think you'll agree on this, the thing is the geopolitical uncertainty caused by the election of President Trump and his decision
absolutely nothing to
do. Give Europe over to the dictator Putin.
Or maybe if you stop giving so much money to Ukraine, we might have a bit more money for your council houses. No, I really don't understand how, and it's, if you don't mind me saying, it's a very kind of socialist approach to say, look, we need to build 1 million council houses, we need to fund more disability benefits.
Well, I'm a socialist, so don't be surprised.
Go figure. I'm not surprised to hear you say that, and I mean that with no disrespect. You're entitled to
view. I didn't think you were disrespectful.
No, but what I'm always fascinated by is the socialist kind of magic money tree approach. You know, what Thatcher said is socialism's brilliant until you run out of other people's money. One of the best political phrases ever, and it really applies to this conversation and to the current government, that if you want to continue to fund an extortionate increase in disability and sickness benefits and an asylum process and benefits for migrants and council housing and so on, you have to pay for it. And you can't just use the word growth like Rachel Reeves does, literally on a daily basis, as if that's a magic bullet.
It's a policy. It's a policy.
But you've got to pay for it, John. You haven't told me how you're going to pay for it.
I have. I told you.
You just said growth.
No, I said you borrow money, you build council houses.
You can't keep borrowing money.
The economy.
We've already been downgraded by the ratings agencies because our borrowing is the most it's ever been, the same as our tax burden. So you want to tax us more and borrow more. It makes no fiscal sense.
There's 100,000 families. 100,000 families in London living in temporary accommodation.
Yeah.
If there were 100,000 councillors,
blame Sadiq Khan, who's been the mayor for 9 years. Why doesn't he build more houses?
You can't put people into council houses unless council houses have been built.
Yeah. Sadiq Khan promised to build 32,000 of them a year 9 years ago. He's built about 8,000 a year. So that in London, if you want to use that as your example, the Labour mayor has failed miserably to build enough houses.
Temporary accommodation is a problem everywhere.
Yeah.
If we build more council houses, we'll get families and we'll help save.
Do you think? Let's trigger you on something else, John, as we're having fun. And maybe if we stopped the influx of legal and illegal migration to Britain, we wouldn't have to worry so much about temporary accommodation.
That's just not true.
Oh, isn't it? So where do we house the 700,000 people that come here by way of net migration every year?
The people who come here by meeting the rules for legal migration get accommodated within the extended.
But you just said that there's a shortage.
I'm saying that for homeless people, homeless families, there are no council houses to put them in. They have to put in it
because they're being taken up by migrants. Is that what you're saying?
Because they have to. There's no migrants don't go into council.
Where do they live then? So we've got 700,000.
They live in rented accommodation. They live near where they work. They live far away from where they work.
But where does the rented accommodation come from? You're saying we've got a shortage, but you don't seem to equate that to the fact that we have 700,000 people coming into the country every year by way of net migration. I mean, I'm not sure how you're squaring the circle, John.
No, I'm sure you're not as willfully unable to understand this.
No, I understand. I'm just asking for an explanation based on what you told me.
If I'm employed as a surgeon, but I've migrated from the UK, I don't make a claim on a council house. Hardly any people who come into the country as legal migrants.
So you think
come in with housing need.
Sorry, you think people that come into this country,
populations.
You think people coming to this country are all surgeons? I mean, honestly, what Labour Party manifesto document did you swallow?
People coming into this country
are all surgeons. What about engineers? Are they engineers and nuclear scientists too?
People come with levels of skills that match the needs we have in the labour
market.
But
they don't. That's the problem with migration. We're letting everybody in.
No,
we spent the last 2 hours talking about 40,000 people coming over on boats that haven't even got passports. They're hardly engineers, are they?
So I'm sure you're not deliberately confusing asylum seekers and legal migrants. I'm sure that's
they're both the same thing when it comes to the population increase in Britain. And I'm asking, based on what you said, where we house.
I, for one, am proud that very shortly our population will be larger than that of Germany. That's a good thing for our country. I'm proud that people want to come and live in our country. It's a great country.
No, it is a great country. And look, I welcome migration if it's controlled, if it's people that we want here because they contribute, but not an open door policy when we don't have the resources, the housing, and indeed the money to pay for it. I mean, you see that surely. I mean, you can't have this liberal view about everything, whether it's, migration.
I literally can't have a liberal view about everything.
No, what I'm saying is, I apologise. Actually, of course you can have whatever view you want. I'm not suggesting you can't have your view. What I'm saying is you can't have a view that doesn't accord with being able to cash the cheques that you're writing out. So in your last 10 minutes or so, you've said that, effectively we should accept the fact that more and more people are claiming benefits and sickness, benefits by way of disability and sickness, that we need to build more houses, that we should let as many asylum seekers in as possible. But you haven't told me how it all gets funded.
I didn't say anything about asylum seekers, but you're probably mishearing. Maybe you go back over the transcript later. I said about legal migration. Every country in the world has to deal with asylum seekers. That's part of our international obligations as a member of the international community.
Let's not get caught up in that. Let's get back to how we pay for this. Because, look, Rachel Reeves has actually done for once the right thing by saying that we've got to tweak the rules when it comes to universal credit and PIP, because we just can't keep shelling this money out left, right and centre. Forget whose fault it is, John, for a second. But blame the Tories all you like. But that excuse is going to wear very, very thin. Maybe not for you, but for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves very, very soon indeed. I still want to know how it all gets paid for. I mean, she's done the right thing, but she's only cut £5 billion off a £100 billion bill. Where's the money come from? It's got to be paid for. How about a wealth tax, John? Do you fancy a wealth tax?
I think that, the obvious wealth tax is a tax on housing wealth isn't properly taxed in our country, and you know that, I know that. The dogs in the street know that.
But the problem with a wealth tax is everyone just leaves the country.
Sorry.
Everyone that's wealthy goes and leaves the country, so you get no revenue.
I said that during the pandemic, the value of domestic housing in the UK increased by £2 trillion. That was a windfall in wealth. The real imbalance in our taxation system is how poorly the wealth in housing is taxed. That's where the actual wealth is.
But why should someone's house be taxed?
You can't actually leave the country and take your house with you.
But you could domicile it somewhere else in a trust. But hang on, you're suggesting
property taxation is quite an effective way of raising tax.
You're suggesting that the 12 or 13 million people that own their own homes in Britain should have their house taxed over and above council tax, by the way, which already
reforming council tax.
Wow. Okay.
To make it, because it doesn't a tax like council tax, which
tax. That's what I mean.
No. Fairness.
No, tax the rich.
A semi-detached house in Blackpool gets a higher council tax than Buckingham Palace. That's not fair. Okay. That system's fundamentally flawed, and that needs to be changed.
Yeah. Well, in itself, doing that won't pay for the sickness and disability benefits and your million.
Well, the problem with
John, I've got to leave it there. I'm being told I've got to go to a break. This has been fun, brilliant. We've got to do this again, my friend. We've got to do this again. Yeah. That was John McTurnan, funny enough, a former advisor to guess who? Tony Blair. Now we know where all the problems started. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. Back after this.
launch times of F-18 fighter jets off aircraft carriers, their general target set, including individuals, and sort of this timeline of things, which at a minimum would allow the Houthis, were they in possession of this information, or the Russians, you could then provide it to the Houthis to, activate their air defense networks, turn on their radar, get everyone hidden, and essentially either mitigate their vulnerability to attack or shoot down an American manned aircraft.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Well, that was fun, wasn't it? Let me know what you think about that. Whether you agree with me, agree with John. I don't think we agreed on most things there, unfortunately. But that's the way of the left versus the right. A good old-fashioned debate. That was fun. I respect John's opinion, but completely and utterly disagree with all of them. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000 or text me 87222. Just put the word talk before your message. Just read a couple of texts and we're going to go to some callers. Lydia Jones says, when it comes to sickness benefits, a close friend of mine suffers from anxiety and she says here's depersonalisation. I've never heard of that. Does she mean depression, I wonder? Anyway, despite how hard it is, he still goes out and works. Okay, well, yes, that is a very, very good point, Lydia, that having a disability, sickness or an illness doesn't automatically stop you from working. My suggestion earlier was that there are some people that are playing the system and saying that they are ill, sick or disabled in order not to work. My previous guest, John Turney, believes that that never happens and that we should just go with the flow, roll with the punches and keep paying out those sickness and disability benefits no matter how much it costs, and that maybe reforming council tax will pay for it, which obviously it won't. On the question of migrants, there's a suggestion here, which is anonymous unfortunately because it's quite a good one, is that we fine the French £1 million for each and every migrant that they fail to stop landing on our border. If they don't pay, we deduct it from any existing payments that we otherwise would make to them. Yeah, I don't think there's any mechanism that allows us to fine them, unfortunately, but we should ask for the 500 million back, shouldn't we? Let me know what you think about that. 03444 999 1000. Let's speak to Sharon about disability benefits. Sharon in Suffolk, thanks very much indeed for calling.
Good afternoon, sweetheart.
Hello, that's very nice of you. Oh, sweetheart, you're back, Sharon. Thanks for calling.
I'm on a disability benefit. I have been for a long time, but I'm on a. You've got two versions of ESA, the new work acronyms for disability benefit, and I have the contribution base, which means that mine's based on how much money I've paid in when I was working. So I don't get free dentist, I don't get housing benefit, I don't get all of that stuff. I literally have to live on £243 a fortnight.
120 quid a week. Wow. Is that your only income, Sharon?
I have a small pension from... My husband passed away when he was 43, and I have a small pension from where he worked, which worked out at whatever £180 divided by 4 is. I can't do the head.
Yeah. 45 quid or something, yeah. So, and do you work, Sharon, at all?
No, I cannot work now. I physically cannot work.
Okay. Do you mind me asking why?
I have an autoimmune disorder. My kidneys are failing. I have stage 4 kidney disease, and I'm recovering from breast cancer.
Oh my goodness. Well, Sharon, I'm really sorry to hear all that. But you sound, I mean, look, you sound chirpy enough, and presumably you've got an opinion enough to ring this channel. So
yes,
let me ask you this: do you think it's right that 25% of Britain's population is disabled and unable to work?
It's a hard one. I'd like to think not. But in my sensible part of my head, I wouldn't say it's 25%, but it's a lot more than should be.
Yeah. So you think some people are gaming the system, as I do?
Oh, always. It doesn't matter what you've got. Some people are always gaming the system.
So what I can't get my head around, Sharon, is you sound like an absolutely genuine case of someone that wants to work but can't. But you're not on the full suite of benefits. You actually don't seem to be moaning about it, actually. I mean, you seem... I mean, maybe not happy with your lot, but you accept it. You accept the position you're in.
I'm resigned. I'm resigned to it. I'm 63. I'm resigned to it. I'm quite looking forward to my pension because I will double what I've got coming in a week.
What's that, in 2 years' time?
Three.
Yeah. And will that make a significant difference to your income?
Yeah, I'll get double what I am now.
And you've paid in for it, so you deserve it.
But that's neither here nor there. The reason I don't moan about it is all moaning does is affect me. It's not going to change anything, but it just affects my mood. So why moan? Just get on with life. It's an old saying, but be happy with your lot.
But I hear you, and I think you've got a great attitude, a great positive mental attitude, but doesn't it grind your gears when you do come across people that are gaming the system? And actually when politicians, put it this way, you could probably be on a better disability benefit if there weren't so many people lying about them being disabled. So what I'm saying is, Sharon, you deserve more and others deserve less. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
We don't all get what we deserve in this world.
Well, that's true. I can't believe how pragmatic you're being, Sharon.
Or I am. That's just me.
Well, it's laudable.
What I actually phoned up to say, and I have to say I have missed your last half hour because I was in a meeting. But what I phoned up to say was, if it is 25%, I would rather pay that 25%, the money they're scamming, gaming, whatever, than pay one halfpenny to another illegal immigrant. Not a legal immigrant, not somebody coming here to work and put into society, but one more illegal immigrant. Everyone goes on about this £49, but that's £49 per person. So if
what's that, the amount of money that they get in benefits, Sharon, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's without housing, NHS, free driving lessons?
I have to pay for my dentist. I have to pay for my opticians. I do now get my free prescriptions, but I'm surprised she hasn't gone out after that and raised that from 60 to 70. Not that I want to give her any ideas.
No, don't. Yes, be careful. Look, Sharon, we're going to have to move on now. But look, I really, really genuinely appreciate your call. And I have to say that you are very, very correct. I think almost everybody, hopefully everybody listening to this would agree that someone like you that's paid into the system, that has a genuine disability, that genuinely cannot work, shouldn't just be living on 120 quid a week, particularly when we're spending £8 billion a year accommodating asylum seekers, many of which, maybe not all, many of which are not genuine. Sharon, thank you. I really, really genuinely appreciate your call. Let's just go to a text before we go to the break. Peter in Lincolnshire says, the gang we need to smash is the EU, specifically the French. They are the ones allowing the poor, persecuted asylum seekers to cross the channel. Before we go to a break, let me just read you this. Competition time. Time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer. Those very elusive Oasis and expensive Oasis tickets.
How'd you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's 3:34. I'm here for another 25 minutes. So you might just have a chance to get a call in if you want to ring us. 0344 499 1000. Again, thank you for your calls. Thank you for your text. You've certainly participated today. Thank you very much. Always makes for a better show from my point of view. Right, let's talk about net zero now. Yes, the Miliband net zero bandwagon seems to have faltered a little bit. So buried deep within the spring statement from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was a provision, and that provision is that £8 billion of taxpayers' money has had to be set aside, basically in case some of the stuff that Ed Miliband wants to do, wants to ensure that we invest in, that we are obligated to fall in line with, just in case those things don't work. So whether that's carbon capture or solar farms not perhaps producing as much power as anticipated, or wind farms or whatever, all of these things, £8 billion has been set aside by his own department to compensate companies in case the technology fails. So to be clear, this is kind of part of the GB Energy thing, I think, reading between the lines, that where GB Energy is saying, look, we'll invest in you and you as a consequence come here and unveil your product, your net zero service to us so that we can be more sustainable in the future and so on. There's a provision here that if it doesn't work, which tells us something, doesn't it? If it doesn't work, they say, there's an £8 billion compensation fund, which is effectively been put in place to pay those companies compensation. Well, let's talk to Harry Wilkinson now, who's head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Harry.
Good afternoon.
Hi, how you doing? So what do you make of this? This is a bit of an issue for Ed Miliband, isn't it? It doesn't show a lot of faith in his philosophy, does it?
Well, listeners who are familiar with hearing about net zero costs mounting up, unfortunately, are hearing that same story once again in this case. This is all about carbon capture and storage. So the idea is you siphon off the CO2 in those industrial processes and you liquefy it and you bury it underground. The only problem is, it's been attempted all across the world, including a very high-profile site in Canada, but no one's been able to do this economically. The technology is there, sort of, but it's just so expensive that more research is being done to find out an economic way of achieving this. This is £8 billion that's been put aside on top of 22 billion. But the really risky part of this situation is net zero means we have to decarbonize the entire economy. And there's all sorts of industrial sectors where we don't know yet how to do those industrial processes in a zero carbon way. So £8 billion will not be nearly enough to compensate the businesses. We are seeing all sorts of businesses going under at the present moment, 38% reduction in the chemicals sector, and net zero forces us, binds us to be using these kind of expensive, unproven technologies.
Wow. So let's set aside for a second the merits of getting to net zero or not. We can talk about that all day. My contention certainly that it's pointless when China, India, the United States are doing what they're doing in terms of the output of carbon from those economies versus ours. We're about 1%. So even if we get to net zero, then that 1%, it's infinitesimal when it comes to the rest of the world. Set that aside for a second. What we're saying is here, and thank you for explaining it so clearly, is that, in fact, let me liken this to a private sector business. So I've run a couple of private sector businesses with boards and shareholders. If I walked into the boardroom, Harry, and said, hey, there's some technology that isn't proven. We've never got it to work anywhere, but I'd like £22 billion, please, to invest in it. And then later on, I have to go back to the board and admit that it might not work, and therefore I need another £8 billion on the basis that it might fail and I've got to compensate people. That's £30 billion of shareholder money. The shareholders in this analogy, by the way, of course, are the British taxpayers. I would be fired.
That's right. And we only have this consideration of uneconomic technologies and these wholly inappropriate risks
being placed onto taxpayers because of the government. The government is choosing to take these risks with our money, taxpayers' money. That is money that the people of this country have contributed to, and these are totally inappropriate risks. The government does need to behave more like a company. It shouldn't be so lackadaisical with the public's money. They said something I think that was very telling in their response to this story. They said that it was misleading to say that the public would be £255 a year worse off because of the cost of paying for this through their energy bills, because businesses were paying for that. But business energy costs get passed through to ordinary people.
To consumers. But it's not OK, is it, to say, well, the public aren't going to pay for it? Bearing in mind, since the government was elected on July the 5th, we've had, I think, 3. We're about to have our 3rd increase in energy costs. So the bunkum, frankly, that came from Ed Miliband and Keir Starmer before they got elected, that they would save us £300. I mean, that's certainly not happened. So that was a lie, wasn't it? Or they were certainly being very misleading, should we say, if we're being kind, with regard to grabbing the votes of the public on the basis of bribing them with a £300 cheaper annual energy bill every year. That simply hasn't happened. But you don't have to be Einstein to realise that if you're going to create a whole new technology, new infrastructure, new, almost a new addition to the national grid, 180 kilometres of pylons down the east coast of Britain and so on, that the cost of that in terms of infrastructure and the subsidies that actually the government's had to give to companies by way of investing into some of the businesses through GB Energy, for instance, it's obvious that extra cost is going to have to come from somewhere. It either comes from energy bill payers or it comes from the taxpayer. But guess what? They're the same person.
They are, and so it is a complete delusion to imagine that you can make business pay for something when actually they're forced to put their prices up, or they have to employ fewer people, or businesses from elsewhere just don't come and invest in the UK. So actually the British public, of course, will bear the burden of these costs, and there is no way to avoid that from happening. Of course, if we want Britain to be a more productive, successful place, we've got to be having cheap energy costs, and the way to do that is not by building huge amounts of more offshore wind, onshore wind, solar that require all these extra pylons, as you say. The actual underlying costs of these technologies are much higher when you take into account the fact that they have to be backed up by fossil fuels to be able to operate all the time, because the sun is simply not shining all the time in this country and the wind isn't always blowing. These are basic facts, and yet Ed Miliband is ploughing on regardless, even though he knows this can't work.
Yeah, so well documented, of course, that all those solar panels coming from China in the coming weeks and months are indeed made using fossil fuels. I think there's a big element of plastic in them as well, which of course is made from oil, I think. And we already have our offshore energy. We have the benefit of about 50 years worth of North Sea oil and gas still. But of course, Ed Miliband has curtailed that and cancelled all future oil and gas licences. This man, frankly, Harry, is a maniac, isn't he?
Well, he's a hero to Just Stop Oil, but to no one else.
Which is why they've hung up their T-shirts.
They have said, exactly, they've said they're not going to protest anymore because they're so delighted that he said we're not going to have any new oil and gas licenses in this country. This is energy that's homegrown. It's lower emissions to be using our own oil and gas and to be shipping it in from elsewhere, and it also improves our national security. This is a massive win that we're just turning our nose at, because Ed Miliband's ideological approach to net zero means that he can't tolerate anything else but getting emissions down. He's missing the much bigger picture because of this monomaniacal obsession with net zero.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest actually that now we're not going to see Just Stop Oil T-shirts on the streets of Britain anymore. I think we here at Talk should actually commission our own T-shirts which simply say Just Stop Ed. Well, how long can he last? I mean, this man's got to be fired, hasn't he? He's certainly got to be moved to one side in the reshuffle, particularly. I mean, and I'm not just being glib. The serious point is the Office of Budget Responsibility in the last few days have said that this quest to get to net zero by 2050 will take, and this is their words, this is the OBR, which obviously is in lockstep with the government. It is a government advisory, that getting to net zero by 2050 will take 10% off of our economy's value, 10% of GDP. So, you've got Rachel Reeves on the one hand here, Harry, saying we need to grow, grow, grow. I had a guest on just now that I was arguing with, and his only supposition, his only argument was about the economy growing as a left-leaner, yet growth and net zero are completely incompatible with each other.
Well, there are these fascinating tensions emerging in the Labour government at the present moment. Rachel Reeves wants to get on with the third runway at Heathrow. I thought that was an excellent development. But of course, so long as you're signed up to net zero, and we as a country are signed up to net zero through the Climate Change Act, then, you know, these kind of examples are going to be litigated in the courts. You're going to have people like Just Stop Oil and other activist groups taking the government to court about these decisions, saying, well, look, aren't we signed up to these climate pledges? So, you know, I think Keir Starmer does need to get a grip. If he really does want to promote growth, which he should do, you know, then he has to see that net zero is the thing that's blocking that from happening. What? And he's got to get rid of Ed Miliband. You know, I think many interesting Labour commentators are actually seeing Ed Miliband doesn't really fit into this whole growth narrative.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. They're diametrically opposed, Harry. Growth and net zero don't work together.
So we will watch this battle unfold, and it clearly is an intractable battle. And so how that develops will have huge implications for this country.
Well, but Harry, you know what has to happen is Ed Miliband should go because he's a climate lunatic, and Rachel Reeves should go because she's economically illiterate.
Well, I think there's much to be desired in both of their performances, but so far as I'm concerned, you know, the best of a bad bunch would be Rachel, who does want to get ahead with various projects, even as she increases the tax burden and she makes very other difficult and unnecessary decisions. But you know, Ed Miliband, I think, has been more damaging.
Well, I asked a politician recently in a closed room, I won't say who it was, you know, who was more dangerous, Keir Starmer or Ed Miliband, and they had no hesitation in saying it's Ed Miliband. Let me just remind everybody, our tax burden is the highest it's ever been, and our energy costs are the highest they've ever been. In fact, our energy costs, of course, Harry, are the highest in the world, as I understand it. Harry, got to leave it there because we've got 14 minutes to go and we've got to get some callers in. Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at GWPF, that's the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to a break. More calls after this.
Tide goes out, it just reveals this mass of debris essentially from these migrant crossings, A bit further down the beach was a beanie. A bit further down was some trackies. A bit further up, a puffer jacket, and then of course even a really cheap life jacket. And me and the photographer were looking at this life jacket, and we were like, we actually don't think. I know it says life jacket on it, but we don't actually think that would save a life if it needed to.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, 10 to 4. I'm handing over to Peter Cardwell in a few minutes' time. Going to take some calls in the meantime and maybe read out some texts. Jane from Milton Keynes wants to talk about migrants. I bet you do, Jane.
Hello.
Hello.
Alex. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
What is it about migrants you want to talk about, Jane?
So I was a foster carer from 2004, and I was asked to take on a young man who said he said he was 14, or the police said he was 14, but he wasn't. He was probably about 18, 19. He stayed with us for 4 months, and that was in 2008, and he's still here. He's got a flat nearby.
So sorry, when you say he's still here, he still lives in your town, but he's now in a separate flat?
Yes.
How did he get the flat?
Through the council.
And he's on his own as a single man?
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah.
There's 1.2 million people on the housing waiting list, Jane.
Yes, that was in about 2008, 2009. I can't remember exactly when. After that, we had another 3 young men come who said they were 12, 13, 14. When they came in, one was over 6 foot and he was about 25 to 30, and the other 2 were around about 22, 23, that sort of age.
Sorry, Jane, sorry. Just for the benefit of everyone listening to this, right, I'm trying not to laugh here. It's a very serious subject. You're told by the authorities that these foster children, big inverted commas, are 12 to 13 years old, and you think one of them was between 25 and 30 years old. Are you kidding?
Yeah, at least, or he might have been older, but it definitely...
and what happens? You take them in?
Yeah, I took them in, but I'd got another young girl in when he came in.
Oh, my God.
So I was up all night keeping an eye on her, and then I had him moved out the next day. But it was the same with the other 2. Yes.
When this giant walks up with his beard and he's, can of beer under his arm and, a pack of fags in his hand, what did you say anything to the authorities as they dropped him off and said, this is 13-year-old, whoever, and did you not kind of remonstrate that this doesn't look and feel very right, particularly as I've got a young girl in the house? What did they say?
Yeah. Well, it was around about midnight that he came in.
That helps.
So they just asked me to keep an eye on him till the morning, and I'll move him on, and they did.
But Sharon, this is absolutely despicable. The authorities should not be putting you and that young girl in that position. Which local authority was this?
Am I allowed to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was Milton Keynes.
Wow. Wow. The fact they've put you in that position, I think, is absolutely disgraceful. I mean, I don't even want to begin to think about what could have happened overnight.
Yeah,
and was it one of these individuals, or was it more than one at that night?
So the oldest man, he was on his own, but we had 2 more come in about a month or so later. And I'd say the youngest one was about 17, 18, but the older one was in his mid-20s.
And did they behave themselves?
They were very rude.
Rude? But nothing more than rude? I mean, we're not getting to something here where they transgressed or did anything that they shouldn't have done. They were just rude, yeah?
Well, they stayed in the bedroom most of the time, but when they came, they were really hungry. So we made them scrambled egg on toast, and this was late at night as well. So they had scrambled eggs on toast, and then they'd sit and snap their fingers because they wanted more.
Sorry?
Yes.
They've snapped their fingers. They've just got off a boat They're 25 years old. You take them in out of the kindness of your heart, and when you make them food and they're still hungry, they snap their fingers at you. Seriously?
Yeah, but these were off lorries.
Sorry, is this April the 1st, Jane? Are you winding me up? Is this one of my friends?
No, I'm not.
Seriously?
No, I'm not winding you up. No, these were picked up at the M1 services. They weren't on the boats.
I have to, Jane. Thank you very much for calling and telling us this. And I admire your candour, but also your bravery and the fact that you've done what you believe is the right thing to try and house these people. And whatever we think about migrants, no matter what side of the political spectrum we might be on, I think, look, hats off to you that you've done the right thing. And by way of the authorities and these ignorant individuals, you've been treated despicably, but you should never be put in a position like that. Forget the rudeness for a second, but I mean, anything could happen. I mean, there is a way, isn't there, by way of... in fact, I was talking to Renee Hundekamp about this. She said that there is an absolute way of knowing how old somebody is. I think it's something to do with wrist x-rays. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it's something to do with that. I mean, surely, for the safety of the public that the government are supposed to protect, they should do something to ensure that these kids, not kids at all, are really 13, not 30.
Well, I was told that it was because the police were saying that they were those ages because they wanted them out of the cells and they were blocking the cells. So that's why they put them into foster care, and that's why it always came late at night, because they'd been hanging around in the police cells during that time. But this was 10 years ago. But now I think they don't even bother. I think they just put them wherever, because there's so many. And I also think that the government, and the Labour, they've had plenty of chances to stop this, but they don't want to. And the English people, the British people, we're not going to stand for it. It's going to come to a revolt in the end. You wait. I can just feel it coming.
Well, we had a caller earlier on suggesting that that might be the conclusion. That's not something that I or this channel will certainly encourage. But I think we do get as a population to a tipping point, particularly when, you just had thousands of people listening to your story, Sharon. Yes, I know it was 2008, 2009. I suspect it's still pretty typical. Whether those individuals that are pretending to be 13, that are really 30, are ending up straight into foster homes with families like yours, or whether they're going into the general population by way of them, ending up in Wethersfield, for instance, the 800 migrants that are in a former RAF base there, for instance, wherever they are, particularly when we treat these individuals like children and therefore treat them much more leniently and in a much more a soft and appropriate way to children, and then find out that they're indeed 25 to 30 years old. That is not only inappropriate, but it's downright dangerous. I mean, this last 5 minutes, Sharon, I have to say, this is, if ever there's an advert for making sure that we start to control and protect our borders, Jane, you're it.
Oh, wow. Well, from what I know, from speaking to other foster carers, these people go to agency carers now, not local authority anymore.
I'm not often lost for words, Jane, but I am. OK, I've got to hand over to Peter Cardwell now. I wish you could almost stay on the line and talk to Peter Cardwell about this, because I think he'll be quite as gobsmacked as I am. Jane, I really, really genuinely appreciate your call, and well done for doing the right thing, even though I think your hospitality and your good nature was abused, as Jane in Milton Keynes. What an enlightening, outrageous, gobsmacking story. Did you hear any of that, Peter Cardwell?
I heard a bit of it, yeah. Fascinating call, and just,
I mean, how dangerous
disgraceful.
Is it? The authorities see fit to put a 13-year-old that's really 30, with a beard and goodness knows. And bearing in mind, we don't know who some of these people are.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
It's absolutely. I'm genuinely gobsmacked.
Yeah.
Wow. What are you going to be talking about?
Well, another
cheery stuff.
Another absolute outrage, and believe it or not, it's not often you see me saying Labour Cabinet Minister, absolutely right, 100%. Shabna Mahmood, Justice Secretary, completely agree with you. She says there will never be a two-tier sentencing approach under my watch. Well, let's see if she's going to legislate against these absolute clowns, arrogant clowns in the Sentencing Council, including Lord Justice William Davis, who, in my strongly held personal belief, is an arrogant clown.
Yeah, I called him earlier reckless, and I think they should be disbanded. And look, Keir Starmer's issued a statement, of course. Yes, let's see what they're really made of, this Labour government, in terms of just disbanding it.
Totally, and they can use a very simple piece of legislation to get rid